And we're back, episode 28. I'm your host, Nick Peppard. Sean is going to be joining us hopefully a little bit later. He had some stuff come up he had to take care of, but we are honored today to have special guest Jonathan Brumley on the show to talk some engine operations. Jonathan, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited.
So, yeah, man, we got finally got you on the show and roped you into talking engine for a couple hours with us. So pretty excited about it, man. It's been a long time coming.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
So let's dive into your kind of your background, kind of where you started in the fire service, and just talk to us a little bit about your journey on where you started, kind of the pathway to get where you're at now, and what you got going on now.
Yeah. So like many of us, I started as a volunteer. I did that in a small rural community that I actually live about 15 minutes away from now. And I loved it. Fell in love with the job from pretty much day one. And it's just definitely a God thing that I was led to the fire service. And I knew almost from the start that that's what I wanted to do full time. So I did that the whole time with the end goal of being a career firefighter. And it was about a 2-year process. That was kind of back in like 2008-ish when the economy wasn't so good. And that was certainly around the time where you might have a fire department only hiring, 2-3 guys out of a list where 5,000 people were competing for it. And obviously times have changed a little bit in a lot of areas and it's not nearly as competitive, but it was a little bit of a process to get hired. So I was pretty much testing anywhere and everywhere that I could. Ended up in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. It was just a place that I could drive to after work, take a test and drive home. And believe it or not, it was a really great experience. One of the smallest paid fire departments in the country, if we're being honest. There was only 15 of us over the course of 3 shifts. And so on a daily basis, it was 4 to 5 of us trying to hold down the fort, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. And I really loved that because, nobody else was coming and you had to do all the work. So you were doing fire attack, you were doing vent, you were doing search. And then, of course, we were doing wildland, we were doing hazmat, like you name it. We had to do it because nobody else was there. And from there, I knew, big city is what the bee's knees was. So I ended up in Houston, Texas. And so I went from one of the smallest fire departments in the country that was paid to one of the largest fire departments in the country that was paid, and spent some time there before now going to where I'm at. Coming back home here to Colorado, where I grew up, working for the department that I said was my dream fire department from day one, Denver Fire. And now I get to be a backstepper on Engine 3 in downtown. And it's been probably my absolute favorite assignment that I've had over the course of the 14 years that I've been in the fire service.
Yeah, man, that's something to be said for following your dreams and going where God opens up doors. And definitely, I've also worked a couple places. So, it's sometimes getting where you want to be in life and stuff. Just, it's funny how like doors open and stuff and things take place to get you where you want to be. And I can tell you, man, like it's a pretty diverse, like fire service background, right? From Nebraska to Texas to Colorado. And I'm sure there's quite a few, while there's similarities obviously to the fire service, no matter where you go, I'm sure demographics and resource pools and just the way things are done vary from place to place, right? So kind of a diverse, background and experiences as far as tactics and operations and stuff. And like I said, when you're working for a small department where it's just you, nobody else is coming, you get to kind of dabble into a lot of stuff, kind of almost jack of all trades, if you will, because you have to do it all to go into maybe a bigger system where you can kind of focus in on one particular skill set or a couple skill sets. And I think that's a pretty cool experience, man. Just hearing your story and knowing kind of where you've been in the country and just knowing a little bit about those parts of the country and operations. You've seen a lot of different ways of skinning the cat, so to speak, and so I just want to talk about that a little bit. What is some of the things that, stand out to you as maybe some of the highlights of learning from those different places in the country geographically, and how did that kind of influence you as an instructor?
Well, I think it brings a ton of value to me as an instructor. And what I mean by that is it doesn't pigeonhole me into one particular geographic area in terms of tactics, in terms of the amount of resources that would show up. And I really try to look holistically through the course of what my experience was in each of those different scenarios, and try to apply that as I go to different places around the country, just so that I'm not saying, hey, this is how Denver Fire does it and this is how you should do it. No, this is my experience in a department with 15 people. This is my experience in a combination department made up primarily of volunteers. And this is my experience in a larger urban fire department. And if what I'm teaching doesn't fit in each one of those categories, I probably am not going to use it. I need it to be able to apply in each of those situations. And so I'm kind of looking for a more universal approach to how I teach hand lines, suggestions that I make for, water application, or just the timing of fire attack and ventilation, all of these things. And try to look through it of the lens of like, does this apply to everybody that's coming to class today? As opposed to, oh, this only works if you have, 40, 50 people showing up. And I try to take that approach in everything that I do.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, honestly, man, like, I think having that relative experience in those different demographics, different parts of the country and things like that, like I said, that it does bode for kind of, I think, like I said, kind of reinforces that universal approach to what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to the guy that's got 3 guys on a rig or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, showing up with limited staffing, and I can relate to guys that have a lot more resources or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
some of the takeaways of like, hey, this works no matter the situation, right? This is stuff that you can do if you do have limited staffing. And obviously the show here, the Make Do Suburban Fireman podcast, like play on words or whatever. But in a lot of the country, most of us are operating in less than ideal staffing situations. And even some of our bigger urban systems, everybody thinks that you work in a big city that you have 5 guys on a rig, 6 guys on a rig, and that's just not the case. Even a lot of your urban departments where you may be in a big department, but you still may have minimum staffing of 3 on an engine. Like that happens in a lot of bigger departments across the country. And so, like, I think that's what's kind of the nice thing about what you're doing, and teaching and being able to catch, a little bit of your class last year and kind of listening a little bit. It does apply to all of us, because at the end of the day, like when you have to move hand lines, like you got to be able to get it done, whether you got 2 guys on the line or whether you got 5 guys on the line, and some of those truths kind of hold true regardless of your staffing. So and
For sure.
that's really kind of the gist of what I wanted to get to kind of lead out, I guess, with discussing today is obviously you got an affection for the engine.
I do.
You're an engine nerd, like I can relate. I enjoy engine stuff quite a bit. And you got a class, Attack of the 2.5, right? And I want to talk about kind of what got you into instructing, and then like where your passion for the engine and kind of in particular the class, the Attack of the 2.5 came from. And if you don't mind, man, just kind of walk us back a little bit to that point where you're like, hey, I want to share this information with other people, and what made you passionate to pass that on, and kind of why in particular the affection for the 2.5 and what got you going down the path of teaching that program.
Yeah. So I think I've been pretty open about the fact that what got me started is I was terrible at it. And I just was not any good with the larger hand lines. It crushed me. And I really wasn't an effective engine firefighter when it came to using all the equipment that was already on my rig. And that was kind of what a recognition of that is what started the journey of just trying to be better. Because I started seeing all these videos and I was going to classes where guys were just crushing it. They were doing so much better than me. And I felt like, oh man, I got to explore this a little bit and decide if it's something I just can't do, or is it because I haven't put in the effort that I need to, or I don't have the knowledge, whatever it might be. So that's really where the journey started. And it was probably a 5 or 6 year journey of taking a lot of classes, both hands-on and listening to lectures on just engine company tactics. And that's not to say that I wasn't doing truck stuff too. It just happens to be that the engine stuff really bit me first. I think that, had I've been in a different environment, you know, I'd be just as excited about chainsaws and ladders and all of those things too, you know. Um, I just want to be a good firefighter is what it comes down to. And whatever role that I'm put in, I'm excited to be there, and I want to be the biggest asset I can be that day. So it was just a journey to get better, taking all those classes. And I I just like passing along the things that have been shown to me, because I recognized within myself where I was and where a little bit of quality instruction got me to. And that's not to say that, you know, some of my initial mentors or academies were not doing it to the best of their abilities. I think there's just some little tweaks that can be made along the way that make a night and day difference when it comes to effectiveness on the fire ground. And recognizing that, I was just sharing that information, and people were super gracious along the way to give me all kinds of those tidbits. So guys like Aaron Fields, guys like Brian Brush, listening to stuff with Jeff Shoop, they were kind of the ones who I was really looking to and were taking classes from to improve my skills. And I started compiling all that information into a single resource, really just for myself and for the guys that I was working with. And over time, I started to recognize, oh man, this is pretty awesome what I've got put together. I'd love to be able to share this with other people. I had no idea what it would turn into. I'll be completely honest. And specifically, Brian Brush taking me under his wing, saying, hey, I'm headed to Colorado. I know that's where you're from. Hey, we've got this single tie. I know you've been really working on all of this hands-on stuff. Do you mind helping me out with a class? And that's really where it started, was him willing to take a shot with me and bring me along. And I really got to work under those fire by trade guys for a long time. And as fire by trade kind of stepped away from some of the hands-on stuff, a lot of those classes got filtered in my direction, and it just kind of went from there. And so now I've been blessed to travel quite a few places. Last year, I think I did somewhere around like 15, 16 classes, and I think it was 11 different states. So it was pretty spectacular where I started and where I've gotten to go because of it.
Yeah, I mean, I like that, you know, talking about, you know, Brush and Shoop and some of those guys. I mean, Fields, obviously, kind of building on giants, right? I mean, you know, some of these guys that have done monumental work for the fire service in the last
it
couple
is.
decades.
It's incredible. And obviously their willingness to share is what has spurred an engine revolution in the US, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And like I said, you know, I think it is, you know, kind of cool that, you know, guys like that, they say, hey, man, like you got a passion for this. And sometimes that little nudge, you know, that little nudge out of your comfort zone, like, hey, go, you know, share this, like take this to the next level, take that next step, is what we need in our career to kind of get us going, right? Kind of like, hey, you know, you got this, go do this, like pass it on. And man, you know, I look back over my career, and I can look at guys along the way that have done the same thing, like teach you stuff, show you stuff, and like kind of give you that nudge to. And it really, that's what the fire service should be about, right? Is we teach guys, we build guys up, we give them the tools to be successful, and then, you know, pass the torch to the next generation and the next generation, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, man, kudos to, I mean, the guys that, you know, obviously some of those guys are still, you know, doing things, you know, big things in the fire service, and you know, but it is awesome to see those guys sharing that passion with you, sharing that knowledge, and kind of, you know, hey, here's the torch, man, like take it and pass it on. And that's what the fire service should be about, man. That's what we should be doing with our guys. And you know, testament to those guys, testament to you for, you know, then taking the action to actually go do something with it and not just sit on it, right, and pass it on. So that being said, you're obviously have, you know, the affection with the engine. You know, I kind of grew up in the fire service, pretty much engine company, do it all. You know, most of my early career was spent in smaller environments. I spent a little bit of time in Tallahassee and Hillsboro, a little bit bigger systems, but for the most part, I mean, engine work was kind of where I spent the bulk of my career. And so I developed a love for, I like a good stretch, man. I like a good push. There's something about it. Like, it's, to me, it's one of the best jobs. on the fireground, man, is being first due engine, making the stretch, and just going through that door and watching things change and making your environment better. That is a beautiful thing. And we all know, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody can talk all the smack they want, but the engine's the Lord's work. It is. I mean, it is God's work. And those truck guys, they like to look at us through holes they cut and all that kind of stuff. But we know who's doing the real work inside. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I agree
So
100%.
I gotta get all the engine stuff in I can, because Duffy's not here to counter me with all the truck stuff. So
take your shots while you can.
yeah. Oh yeah.
It's best when you can't get punched in the face. I agree.
That's right. So yeah, let's dive in, man. Let's let's talk some engine stuff, man. Let's jump in first and foremost. Let's talk about as far as you've seen some different philosophies, I would imagine, over your career, traveling the country, teaching, working in different places, different philosophies around engine culture. So I just want to get your take on the importance of the engine on the fireground. Obviously, goes without saying, put the fire out. But to me, it's so much more than that. To me, it's everything from the movement of water, from supply to pump to attack packages to getting the line in the right place, and it is so much more than just putting water on the red stuff. Even though in its simplest form, that's yes, that is what we're doing. But I just want to get your thoughts on engine philosophy and kind of like where you think there's been a lot of obviously kind of a resurrection of engine company operations over the last 10 years, which is awesome. A lot of education, kind of teaching guys about different stuff. But where do you see? I mean, I don't know about you. I came in the fire service and it took me like 8 years before I realized like all fire hose wasn't the same, all nozzles weren't the same, like all hose loads weren't the same. Like there's a lot of stuff, and just the what is really simple in the sense of like, hey, we got to stretch a attack line to go put this fire out. But the little things like estimating the stretch, getting the coupling to the door, getting yourself lined up for success. So I just want to get your thoughts on some of those things as far as like when you're pulling up as a firefighter. What are some of the things that what's your mindset first and foremost as an engine firefighter arriving, first, second, third due? What's your kind of take on what are some of the things that you're looking at as a firefighter, sizing up a building, sizing up your stretch, and kind of let's just jump down that rabbit hole, man, and kind of talk about the mindset of being on the engine first and foremost, and then what you're looking at as a firefighter arriving on scene that may be different than what the officer's looking at, stuff that's unique to that firefighter role when you're pulling up, whether it's estimating stretch, picking the right hand line, that kind of thing. What goes through your mind when you're showing up on a fire?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll be completely honest. I was that firefighter, especially early on in my career, that somebody could tell me that this is an 1 3/4, this is a fog nozzle, and that's where the conversation ended. And I was completely content with just that little bit of information, not really recognizing the impact that the attack package that we put on our engine actually has on the outcome of our ability to be effective when it comes to applying the wet stuff to the red stuff. If we can make it as simple as we want to, or we can dive into the weeds and we can actually make a significant difference with just the way that we load hose, with the equipment that we select to put on our engine in the first place. And then, that obviously has dramatic impacts on our ability to keep the line open and flowing water where it needs to go. So there was kind of a renaissance for me when I started diving into some of this information. And obviously a lot of us are familiar with people like Dennis Laguerre, guys like Ray McCormack, Steve Robertson, really opened my eyes to the fact that one attack package is not the same as another. And it really made it a point to understand what those differences and what those implications really were. And, we could make it as simple as a smoothbore versus fog debate, but it's so much more than that. And one that I generally don't have because it is not nearly as impactful as some of the other changes that we can make on our rig. I'm looking for volume that meets the fire that we encounter. Really, that's what it comes down to. Am I going to be able to apply the right amount of GPM? And am I going to be able to last through the duration of the firefight? And so those are the kinds of things that we got to prepare for long before that call comes in. Other things that I feel like have really been eye-opening, especially in the last couple of years, is how valuable it is to really know your territory. And especially your first, second, third in places that you would get called to on a pretty regular basis, we better know those places inside and out. And it's incredible when you can hear an address and get a just pure visual of that particular building, where the hydrants are, where the FTC connections are, if it's a sprinkler or a standpipe equipped building, just a general idea of what you're headed to. Like from the moment that you leave the firehouse, you can start thinking so many steps ahead just by knowing those key pieces of information. And that just comes with getting out and really knowing your territory. And I would say that over the last probably 2 or 3 years, I've been able to do that in a way that I've never been able to do before. And it takes so much additional thinking off of my plate because I've already started that game plan in the time before we've even pulled out of that firehouse. And so what that can do for me then is I can now narrow this down to a horizontal stretch versus a vertical stretch versus a standpipe stretch. All of those things are coming into my head, and I can kind of start making some of those decisions before I've even pulled up to that particular building, because it's something that we've narrowed down. It's something that we've trained on, and something that we have a game plan for. Almost like building a playbook, if you will, for a football team. You know, you're like, okay, so when I get this address, that's going to be like a 3rd down and 6. And when it's 3rd down and 6, we have these 2 plays that we call, and we'll just see when we get there, exactly which of those 2 fits. You know, it really narrows things down for you when you're able to do that right from the get-go. So things that I'm looking for, obviously we need to know how much fire we're coming up on. Is it obvious? Do we have no smoke showing? Do we have smoke showing? Do we have flame showing? What side of the building is it? Is this going to be, just a standard single family dwelling where, a pre-connect is going to do the job? Or is this a situation where we're getting reports of fire on floor 5? I'm on the FDC right now, half a block away from where the actual fire department is. That's a very different stretch. And there's a lot of different reflex time that occurs between those 2 scenarios. And so I've got to kind of sort through that in my head. And really, I'm trying to slow down enough that I'm not making a decision that doesn't fit the mold to what we're pulling up to. And I will say this, like, absolutely, fast water is the absolute best thing that we can do on a fire ground. Get water from the tank onto the seat of the fire as fast as possible. Yes. But let's not do it at the sacrifice of pulling the first line to the wrong position just because we need to jump off and sprint to the front door when, maybe the Charlie side was the better call for this particular scenario. So I think that takes a little bit of discipline as an engine company to really get that first line correct. And yeah, more often than not, especially in your residential settings, that's going to be to the front door, but let's pause. Let's take 3, 4, 5 seconds to really take in an initial size up, figure out where's the fire now, where do we think it's headed to, and what do I need to do in the next couple of seconds to really make a long-term impact on that fire.
Yeah, well said, man. Sometimes taking a few seconds to make a few seconds goes a long way, right? Just getting that mental picture, like you said. And if you've done the homework on the front end, like you said, it does lend to making better decisions once you get there, right? If you already kind of know the layout of, you go to housing development or whatever, and you got 3 or 4 types of houses in this development. If you've been in them for med calls or whatever, and you kind of know the general layouts, like that helps along, in making good decisions. If you've been in these commercial buildings, these apartment buildings, obviously, you don't have to do that reconnaissance when you get there because you've already done it. And so mentally you can formulate, like I said, plan A, B, or C based on what you're seeing. And I always joke, like people always say this all the time, well, I'll call an audible. Well, how do you call an audible if you don't even know the game plan?
Right.
So I like that you brought up kind of having, based on that intelligence that you've already gathered beforehand, you can kind of have that plan A in your head. And then if it's, a little different than what we think it's going to be, then, this is kind of our fallback plan, and at least kind of work in your mind. You've already fought that fire in your mind before the fire. And that helps you kind of make better decisions. And it's that whole, recognition, prime decision making, where you've got that Rolodex in your head. You've been in this building before, where the systems are, where the entrance is. and the layout, generally speaking. So yeah, man, right on. Like that's one of the most under, you talk about like always talk about size up from like a company officer or a incident commander standpoint, but it's
Hmm.
so important as a firefighter. Just to, everybody thinks like, you want the firefighters just to be hard charging, like wide open, like, but it's got to be intelligent, right? It can't be
Hmm.
this blind aggression where we're just like wide open at 1,000 miles an hour, but we're going in the wrong direction.
Right.
We
Right.
create more work for ourselves because we don't stretch the line to the right place, or we stretch short because we didn't take the time to really look at our distance or whatever. I mean, there's so many things that as a firefighter that we're responsible for, that goes into sizing up the building on our end. And I think that it goes without saying, like I said, I mean, that first line, if you get it wrong, a lot of bad things can start to snowball
Hmm.
downhill. And
Definitely.
so it is imperative, at least my experience, like we got to make sure we get the first line, like where it needs to go. If that means we need to bump some staffing to help get that line where it needs to
Hmm.
go. I'm a big fan of that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, and how you guys operate. But I'm a big fan of like, let's make sure the first line gets where it needs to go. So if that means
Hmm.
assigning a second engine company to assist with that stretch, because it's a difficult stretch for whatever reason, or it's a longer stretch than usual, or something that's outside of our norm.
Hmm.
To me, I'm all for doubling up, marrying engine companies if we have to get that first line in position and cut off the fire and start getting water on the fire.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you guys marry engine companies? Is it a common practice for you, or is that something that your staffing allows you not to do that so much, or we're
Well, it is a blessing of a four-man engine company where you
sure.
generally have hopefully 2 to 3 guys assisting with the initial
Mhm.
stretch. And granted, that's not always the case. In our particular system, we leave a guy at the fire hydrant, whether or not I like that. That's what I'm told to do
Sure.
as the junior firefighter. So we're laying in on the way in, and so automatically, even with four-man engine
Mhm.
company, we lose that guy right there. Engineers generally don't get involved in the stretch, if we're being honest.
Right.
And then you've got a firefighter by himself pulling the line because the officer's doing his 360, and then bam,
Mhm.
all of a sudden, what started as four-man staffing is still one person making a lot of decisions by himself, laying out that
Sure.
first line the way that he needs to. The beautiful thing is a lot of the fires that most of us fight is going to be that residential structure. And one guy should be able to handle that. I'll just throw that out there. That
Yeah.
should only be the job of one guy. And however many additional people were available at
Mhm.
that time to help him out, plenty good. I love that. But still, the expectation is that one guy can get the job done with 200 feet of dry hose. That's not beyond the expectations of a single guy. But there definitely is situations where, yeah, absolutely marry up those companies, and that just takes discipline on that second due to check in with them.
Mhm.
Not necessarily there to steal their fire. We're there
Mhm.
to make sure that the citizens get the service that they need, so that we're putting out their fire, so that we're pulling them out of that house if they're stuck. And it does. It takes some. It takes some humility. It takes a lot of ego checking to make sure that we're not just pulling this line to beat another engine company. We are pulling this line to save lives. And if it needs to, we'll go help them with the first line. And so
Sure.
it's recommended in a lot of our SOGs. And now we finally have it written in our high-rise policy specifically that we will marry up companies to do our first 2 lines. And yeah, I love that. The other thing that I'll say, and I mean, this may not be a completely popular opinion, but I'm a big fan of SOGs. If we have that written play ahead of time, then we know what's expected of everybody on that fire ground. So if the first due shows up, the second due can help them with water supply, that backup line, if they've got that taken care of, or marry up with the first company. If that's written down, that should be the expectation of everybody on that fire ground. So that help is coming if that difficult stretch is what meets you at the front door or at the top of the stairwell, whatever it might be. And there's a lot of comfort in that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of marrying companies, and I'm a big fan of discussing these things before we just show up at a fire. That's not to say that I want it written out that you shall do this, you shall do this, you shall do this. There should be some leeway in there, but at least have a common language and a common game plan well before you show up to your fires. And I gotta grab a cord real quick. My battery's almost dead.
You're good.
There's
You're
gonna
good,
be fun.
man.
I'll be right back.
So, well, Jonathan steps out here momentarily. I will say this for anybody listening: it is it really, talk about riding assignments, and we harp on this all the time. But in the limited staffing situation, in particular, having spent quite a bit of my career in that situation, having those SOGs are even more important, I think, because you have to be able to, you have to have a game plan. You have to have a plan A on paper, and like Jonathan was saying, you have to kind of have these discussions before the fire. And if you don't, I used to have a captain that it drove me crazy as a firefighter because we would get in the rig and he would just like, hey, Cap, what do you want done? Oh, we'll figure it out when we get here. Like that's literally his. Every time. It didn't matter what we were going to. It could be a basic single family dwelling fire or a flipping, it could be a high rise fire. It didn't matter. And he would be like, we'll figure it out when we get there. And it used to just drive me bonkers because I'm like, dude, why don't we have at least some framework, some guideline for what our plan A looks like for, we're going to a single family dwelling fire. We should have a pretty good idea of who needs to do what, where things need to go. So I'm a huge fan of, I've just kind of, talking about riding assignments and the importance of having those conversations ahead of time and know who's, there's nothing more embarrassing to me than getting on a fire and you got two guys running to the back of the truck and they bump into each other trying to grab the same thing because
Correct.
I thought you were grabbing that. No, I'm grabbing that, and one of those conversations that takes place. To me, if we're going to be professionals, right, that's something that I think for most of our common types of scenarios, obviously you could what if 100 million things, but at least have a plan A in place for who's grabbing what your basic assignment is, based on, first, second, third due engine, whatever, first truck, second truck, based on the type of structure you're responding to. To me, it just makes sense. And it cuts down on the chatter, right? It cuts down on the guesswork of like, hey, wait, am I doing this? Or are you doing that? Everybody kind of knows and goes to work. And to me, like that's really and truly, if anybody listen to this, man, if you don't have like riding assignments, I really encourage you to, have that conversation with your officers, have that conversation with your chiefs. If you're in those positions to implement those things, even better, right? Company officers, chiefs, they can have those conversations and kind of get rid of some of the guesswork on the front end, man. What a, you talk about football players like lining up to play, run a play, right? And they usually have an audible based on what they see from the defense and everything. And they don't just get up to the line and just wing it. Like,
Never.
That's not like, I mean, maybe at the end of the game where it's like a Hail Mary, but even those plays they practice the hook and ladders and all that stuff. Like, and so how much more, and they're playing a game. How much more should we, like in a business where sometimes those decisions impact people's lives directly, like whether they live or die, how much more should we kind of have some of these initial things ironed out ahead of time for the basic type of fires we go to and things like that? Like I get it. There's always like outliers, but most of what we do falls into that 95% inside that bell curve, that 95% or 80% range rather. And fits in that curve, so to speak, of our norm of what we can typically expect. And you talk about single family dwelling fires, right? So where you're at, do a lot of your homes obviously it depends on what part of town you're in, but do a lot of your single family homes, you go to a neighborhood, are they a lot alike? Similar layouts. You typically, like for me, like where I'm at now, the east side of our city is real old, and everything's balloon frame, everything's got a basement, like. And so, like, if you go on the east side of the city, that's kind of what your default expectation is for residential. If you're going to commercial downtown, it's all like type 3 stuff. I mean, it's all type 3 buildings, old school downtown. The west side of the city on the other side of the interstate is all new frame. It's all lightweight. It's all new construction within the last, 30, 40 years. And it's a different animal out there, right? And so, I don't know where you're at, if it's similar, where you're seeing pretty much a lot of the same types of buildings and homes and a few different types of layouts based on what neighborhood you're in. Setbacks are pretty similar, things like that. It to me, like if you can pre-plan that stuff on other calls, it just makes sense to get in there, look at those homes, look at those buildings, and you can kind of almost like I said, you pull out of the firehouse, what part of town you're going to. You can kind of like start like, hey, this is probably what these houses look like. This is what probably going to, the basement stairs are going to typically be, over here. My setbacks are typically 30 feet off the street, things like that, right? painting that picture ahead of time, and you literally, I mean, you can kind of pretty much have, more often than not, first, second, third, like you kind of know based on where you're going what needs to be done, right? So
Absolutely.
are you running into that? I mean, where you're at, or do you have a pretty diverse area? What's
I
your first day look
do.
like?
So we cover the north side of downtown, and what that
Okay.
means for us is it really just depends on what direction we turn out of the firehouse, what we're
Okay.
going to go to. So if I head to the east, we've got single family residences that were built in the 1800s. If
Sure.
I head to the north, I'm going to run into commercial properties, and I'm going to run into a lot of newer multifamily dwellings, things like that. Same thing as I head west. I would say that the majority of what we have west of us is going to be multifamily dwellings that are 3, 4, 5 stories tall and take up an entire block. You can throw in some professional stadiums in there as well. If I head southeast, I'm right in the middle of all the high rises. If I head southwest, or excuse me, if I head southwest is the high rises, southeast is once again a lot of older single and multifamily dwellings. And then you've got the whole state capital area there. So it's incredibly diverse. And that goes back to that statement that I made is if you can know your territory, you can hear the address, the general direction, and that puts you on cue with the type of building that you're about to head towards. And obviously there's information in dispatch that is helpful along with that. So look at all your notes because that's incredibly valuable. But even just hearing an address and a direction can kind of put you on cue with what you're about to go to. And that's absolutely huge. And it's paramount to your decision-making ability. And I feel like one of the things that really solidified that for me is my officer was out getting cancer treatments for a little over a year. So what that meant is we had a lot of officers filling in during that time period. I can't even begin to count the number that tried to fill his shoes for that time period. So for me as a firefighter, I've been in that territory. These guys haven't. And so that gives me the opportunity then to maybe even start making some tactical decisions en route for this officer who's like, yeah, just give me a game plan because you guys know this. I don't. And so I'm very vocal in the back of the rig. But like you said, it allows us to really decrease the amount of communication just by knowing some of those things. So we could get an address, for instance, of 2075 Broadway. And I could be like, hey, boss, if we park on the stairwell, this can be a 300-foot pre-connect and we can get up to any apartment on the 3rd floor. And for somebody who's never worked in that firehouse before, they would never make that call, but that's just something that we've game planned and something that we know is going to happen right off the bat. But if it's on floors 4 and 5 and 6, by dispatch notes, then we're going to go with high-rise packs and it's going to be a whole standpipe evolution. Things like that are going through my head just based on the direction that we're headed out of the firehouse. And so even as a backstep firefighter, any little bit of information that you can pass along is going to be incredibly valuable for the crew as a whole.
Yeah, that's, and I think like, man, it is crazy. Guys get this mindset like, hey, that's the boss's job to figure it out. But really, it's a company endeavor. And as a firefighter, if you're competent and you know your first due and you know your rig and you know your equipment and you know your job, right? You can absolutely impact tactical decision making from the back seat if you have the confidence of the guys that are with you, right? And they know that you're dialed in and stuff. And so like people always think like leadership, they always associate it in the fire service with rank and more like that discussion is being had. Like I think that wall's coming down a little bit where it's not just like, oh, you have to have bugles on your shirt to be a leader or to make suggestions. And thankfully that paradigm has shifted a little bit, but I mean, like, there's still a lot of guys that sit in the back seat. Well, that's not my job, or I'm afraid to speak up, even if they know something, right? They may make the stretch better, or may make for a better push or whatever. And like those conversations, absolutely. And I'll get, like I said, if you got an officer like, hey, I got this, leave me alone. That's one thing, but it's good to see a lot of, senior guys and officers kind of like, hey, this is your firehouse. This is your first due, I'm filling in for the day. And I've been fortunate in my career to have some really good officers that have kind of, hey man, like, I'm just filling in, like, you guys know this area, like where's the best place to stretch on this thing, whatever. And those conversations, man, like when you can get that kind of working togetherness, if you will, that teamwork on the rig, on an engine, man, like that can make or break a stretch 100%, because You know, a lot of it is just comfort with the buildings, comfort with your first due and your rig, and knowing what you can and can't do. And for guys that are filling in, like I said, that's not their norm. That's not their normal environment. Absolutely. Like, hey, if you see something, say something, kind of thing. And we say that all the time, but sometimes we don't really mean it.
Right.
And it's like, you know, you may make the difference of you know, like I said, being a clean stretch or being a really complicated stretch simply by where you position, simply by you know how you set your rig up and things like that. And man, like I said, kudos. You know, I think that we need more firefighters that are engaged. We need more guys that are willing to say, hey, boss, like, you know, I made the stretch. You know, we trained on this like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Like if we park here, like we got a clean shot, like this will, you know. And again, it's still their decision. They still can say, hey, no, we're going to do this instead. But at least you're giving them that intellectual piece there to work with, it kind of mull over for a few to be like, you know what, yeah, let's go there and do that, you know. And I to me, like I said, guys get caught up on like, oh, I don't have rank or whatever, and to me it shouldn't be about the bugles in that situation. It's about what's best for the citizen, what's best for putting the fire out, saving lives. And if we measure everything by that standard, right, then it doesn't matter whose idea it is, right? Because if it's the best idea, it's the best idea. It's the whole Steve Jobs thing, you know. Talking about let the best ideas win. And that's to me the sign of a healthy company, the sign of a healthy firehouse, when people are willing to bounce ideas off each other. And I know we're kind of talking culture a little bit and firehouse, the paradigm there, but there's so much of our success as an engine company starts in the firehouse.
It absolutely does. And I'll be completely honest. Yeah. Like I value rank. And I think that ultimately when it comes to the fireground, like rank wins in decision making. And that's a part of me being vocal, is just being like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, and give them the opportunity to either, go with that gameplay or, change it up. It just goes horribly wrong if I make the decision, or if I don't communicate ahead of time that, oh, you know what, this is why I'm pulling 1 3/4 inches on the job that normally we would pull 2.5. These are my reasons why. And obviously I don't have to necessarily, verbalize every single little piece of that. But if the boss has trust in you, and you have trust in them, then those decisions go a whole lot smoother. And that happens at the firehouse table. That happens, on the drill field long before it happens on the incident scene at the tailboard, because that's not where those decisions should be made.
Right. Oh yeah. Spot on, dude. Yeah. You gotta build that trust. You think about it, 95% of our we really our preparation, everything is before the bell rings, essentially, because once the bell rings, it's go time. I'm not saying you don't think on the fly and offer information, but if you can have the bulk of those conversations and put in the work ahead of time to pre-plan, to practice your stretches, to discuss different options for tactics and strategies, and you have those conversations, and you kind of both know where each other are coming from, right? And the whole team is on the same page of like what you're thinking, what I'm thinking, and everything like that. 95% of the work is done before the bell rings. I mean, really and truly. And then it's just a matter of putting it to play, putting into play those things that we've already kind of worked on ahead of time. And, if you haven't had those conversations, if you haven't established that trust, if you haven't done that in a soft environment, you can't expect to have it to be fluid and things to go really well in the hard environment. That's at least my experience with it, man, is like, you really got to invest on the front end for the payoff on the back end. And
absolutely.
Guys like, oh, why are we stretching again? We stretch all the time because it's muscle memory. It's like, why do baseball players warm up before every game? Why do they do hitting practice like multiple times a week? Like, why, yeah, they know how to hit a baseball, but to stay good at hitting a baseball, you got to do it. And you can talk about it till you're blue in the face. If you don't go put it into play, it doesn't really translate to the field. And I love how like the fire services we're kind of funny because like we like the analogy to the like tactical athletes, and we like the analogy with the paramilitary stuff. Like we love those analogies with, like, when we're talking to the public. But man, it's like sometimes it just drives me crazy because I'm like, guys get, it's boring. Why do we got to stretch hose again? Or why do we got to do this? It's like, because being, knowing how to do something and being good at it are two different things. Like that's just all there is to it. There's, and you talk about like the hose line management, right? With the 2.5, right? If you don't put in all the reps, like you could talk till you're blue in the face, but it doesn't, there's only so much talking can do for you, right? At some point you have to put your gear on and you have to put it into play Otherwise, like, and then there's proficiency, right? Even once you learn a skill, it doesn't just stay there forever. Like, you have to practice at it and practice at it. And so, like, I think, you know, as a whole, the fire service is starting to see the, you know, a shift back towards more blue collar training, like the basics, like getting ourselves dialed in. But I know, like, early in my career, man, I went through a period like where it was like we didn't pull hose a lot, like maybe once every 3 months, like, and kind of the same thing where I didn't feel comfortable with some of the stuff early on just because I wasn't doing it all the time, you know. And then when I got into a place where I was able to like pull hose like every shift, I was like, oh, you start like figuring out stuff and like working through things and working through problems and have guys give you pointers and stuff. But it's one of those things, if you don't do it for a while, you 100% are going to lose a little bit of the little things, right? The little tweaks, the little body positioning, the stamina, the things like that go into good posture, good form, things like that. And it's not just, you know, guys think, well, it's you know, I could talk about it, we're good, or we did this like last month and we're good. And I don't know about you, man, but I like pulling hose. I like pulling hose. I like flowing water. I'm an engine guy, so to me, it's like the more we can do that, you know, and keep our skill set up, and the more we can fine tune and hone, you know, what those stretches look like, and not just in a parking lot either. I mean, like, get in there, you know, get in a training building, get in, you know, you get acquired structures, things that you can actually, you know, work around obstacles and work around pinch points and things like that. Make it as realistic as you can, because, you know, at the end of the day, like I said, I mean, we could all sit out in the parking lot and stationary and spray water. That's great.
Yeah.
And they're not saying there's no value in that ever, but we have to make our training more realistic too, right? So, you know, talk to me a little bit about your, you know, obviously working with the 2.5, the bigger lines, right? Where, when you're talking like hose line management and things that, you know, you're looking for drilling and refining skills, if you get a new firefighter on your rig, right, and they're going to come work with you, and you're going to teach them to be good engine firefighters, handling the hose line, things like that. What are some of the things that you kind of dial in on for training, and what are some things that, you know, when the big points that you try to drive home to them when it comes to being a good engine firefighter, being a good nozzle firefighter?
Man, it's hard not to overwhelm somebody in like the first couple hours. I'll be honest with you, because you just want to you want to give them absolutely everything. And so, yeah, it's a passion for sure for both of us, it sounds like. So it is kind of hard to narrow down just a couple of key points in the first couple of minutes. But, you know, big things is I got to know that they can hold on to the hose line. And I got to build that confidence in themselves, because the reality is I'm not a big guy, and pretty much everybody that comes through my firehouse on probation is going to be bigger than me. So I can guarantee that they'll be able to do it. It's just a matter of building up their confidence and showing them how. And so I take them through a couple of different grips, whether it's a lock off, Camilla lock, whatever you want to call it, or a hip grip. I take them through both of those because those are going to be two of your more challenging positions in terms of your bigger lines, but vital positions in your ability to actually apply water through the course of the firefight, because we can't always just rely on dropping a knee down on the line and expecting that that's going to save us through the course of a firefight. So I really dial in the different positions that I feel like are really valuable. And I see a lot of value in being comfortable, whether you're in a lock off or a hip grip. Or whether you're in a clamp, it really doesn't matter. You need to be proficient in your abilities to recognize when each is appropriate and when one might be more valuable from the other. Or it might just be a scenario where, you know what, I've been fighting fire for a few minutes here and I'm smoked. How about I give a couple other muscles some workout here, switch it up for a second, and still feel confident that we're going to be able to do the job through the entire course of the firefight. So that's huge on me, is just making sure that somebody is comfortable holding onto that nozzle. Other things is backup position. For whatever reason, backup firefighters just do not get the instruction that they need in academies. It's almost pitiful sometimes what we do to the backup firefighters, because we give so much instruction to the nozzle firefighter, but then when it comes to the backup, it's just like, come on, Sally, move that hose line, with no real value beyond that. So I spend a lot of time with how to back up a firefighter, and, you know, that's positioning 5, 10, 15, 20 feet down the line. It's letting the building dictate where my position needs to be. It's not just this, situation where we're bottle to bottle, and that's how we stay the entire fire, because especially on the big lines, we don't have the staffing to make that line move anywhere if we're bottle to bottle. That's one guy doing all the work to move, sometimes 150, 200 feet of line behind him. Nah, not a winning scenario at all. So we got to understand that backup and how vital they are, and also give those key pieces of instruction that this is very dynamic. We're up and down the line through the entire firefight. Yes, we're staying in communication with that nozzle firefighter, but that doesn't mean that I have to touch him in order to do that. And for me as a nozzle firefighter, I'm going to slap you if you come up and you lift the line up and you touch my bottle. Like, I need you down that line. That's doing so much more for me than anything that you do right up on my hip. So I spend a lot of time with that as well. And then, we do live in a pre-connect world for a lot of us, especially in the suburban environment, I'll be honest. And that doesn't mean that we don't have to be thinking about our stretches. It's not just as simple as grab the nozzle, grab a loop, walk to the front door. No, there's a whole lot more to it than that. So I spend a lot of time going over the different scenarios of stretches, giving different looks through our territory. As we come back from medical, we may just stop at a particular building and go stretch this. Tell me what the best load is for this one. Tell me, the distance from, rig to seat, and really dial in those numbers and really get people thinking about the distances that we're actually required to travel here. Talking about the size of the building, the footprint itself. Are we looking at a building that's 50 feet wide? Are we looking at a building that's 25 feet wide? How deep is that thing? And we got to really get good at gauging that, because it's not just a 200. It's not just a 300. It might be, significantly more. It might be significantly less. And we got to be able to encounter each one of those situations. And in my territory, we have a lot of areas with just really small setbacks. So we're talking like, 10, 15 feet sometimes from where our tailboard gets parked. And that is almost more difficult than any other stretch that we go on, when all you've got is a 200-foot line pre-built. That you really have to dial in some of those stretches. So for my particular engine company, I think we spend a lot of time with our probationaries, and even just, anybody who's got questions, or, maybe you've been on for 10 years and you just feel like getting froggy. Let's go pull some lines, man. And like you mentioned, like doing this on a daily basis, making it a matter of habit, that this is just what our engine company does. We go out and we pull lines. I live in a climate where there is a time of year where it is very difficult to go and flow water. I'll just be honest.
I second that.
It can be, in the negative digits, and you're probably not going to flow water that day. But you got to find ways to bring value to your training, and sometimes dry hose is it in those situations. And it's funny because this is all perishable skills. And as much as I enjoy traveling and instructing, like, I better be on my own game as well, both for the benefit of the people that I instruct, and more importantly, the citizens that I am being paid by on a daily basis, and the ones that I encounter on a much more frequent basis than the students that I get the pleasure of instructing. And so with that, there's a measure of accountability that I have to get out, and I have to dial in those skills, because like you said, it's very perishable. And especially when it comes to like moving and flowing a hand line, like that's an incredibly difficult skill. And I can absolutely tell those days where maybe I've skipped 1 or 2 leg days, like moving a 2.5 and flowing at the same time just is not nearly as easy as it was, 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. And like I mentioned, that poor weather season, that it might be 2 months since the last time that, we took out a big line and tried to flow that thing. So take any opportunity that you can to keep building your skills and doing it over and over and over, recognizing that, you're not the rock star that you might have been 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, man. And obviously being up north as well, gets a little cold up here sometimes, and obviously the flowing water when it's 30 below and stuff's turning to ice doesn't usually happen unless we have to.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't, there's still things we could do, on the app floor, dry stretches, things like that, like you said, just to kind of get at least some repetition, work through some different things, in our tactically, going through and walking through buildings and and kind of like, hey, where's our pinch points? Where's our FTC connection if we got to hook up? Where's our standpipe outlets? What do we have, PRDs or PRVs? Like all those things. Like there's a lot of engine skills. The most simple thing obviously is stretching and flowing, moving lines, stuff like that is the bread and butter of what we got to be good at. But there's so many other engine things that we need to go over when we're talking engine ops. I mean, you could spend months. Shoot, there's conferences dedicated to high-rise firefighting or standpipe operations or things like that. There's whole classes dedicated to systems and all these other things. And really, to me, like when I think of engine operations, I've really narrowed it down in my mind, like, because people always just think, oh, it's just fire, water supply and fire suppression. Like that's what the engine does, and the truck does everything else, or the rescue or whoever. But really, we got to master water delivery systems, whether it's drafting from a lake or pumping from a fire hydrant, to our pumps and how the pumps work, to our hose lines, to our appliances, our nozzles, all these things. The building systems. We talk about sprinklers, we talk about standpipes, fire pumps. There's all these other things that and not only that, man, but like the importance of building construction. Everybody like talks building construction on the truck company level a lot more than the engine company level, and I feel like there's not enough engine guys that put focus on building construction enough and systems enough. Like I'll be honest, man. Like I know a lot of great engine guys that when you start talking like systems and stuff like that, like, oh, it's this inspection bureau's job. And to me, I don't think it is. I think that to be really good engine companies, we have to understand how water moves in those buildings, whether it's sprinklers, whether it's standpipes, how the systems work, fire pumps, things like that. And we have to understand building construction. It's not just a rescue or truck company thing. Like we have to understand how the building's going to react to fire, where those void spaces are, where fire is going to travel, if we're going to get ahead of it. And to me, like I said, building construction, I wish that somebody, who knows, maybe one of these days I'll find somebody that is a big building construction guy that also likes to do engine nerd stuff. But I mean, seriously, I wish there was a class for like building construction, like specifically from the vantage point of the engine, because I feel like so much of it is focused on like roof operations and, pulling ceilings and, all this stuff and the truck stuff. And I really wish that we put more emphasis from an engine perspective of like building stuff, because I really, like I said, I don't know, man, maybe it's just me where I'm at. I just don't feel like it gets enough love. And so like when guys, like you tell guys you want to go out and drill on fire pumps and like sprinkler system, like, oh, come on, man, like really. But I mean, like it's something that, man, I don't know about you, but like if I don't look at that stuff pretty regularly, I'm not the smartest guy. Like I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm no Laguerre. I'll put my hand up and say I am no Dennis Laguerre. Like that stuff, I have to like. I feel like the hose stuff comes to me a lot easier than the building systems, when we're talking like all these different suppression systems, detection systems, like that stuff to me is very technical. And I've always thought of it like, oh, it's an inspector thing and whatever, but it's really not. And
not at all.
Not at all. And I don't know, man. I don't know if where you're at, if you guys, I mean, I'm sure you guys have a lot of buildings with those systems in them. And knowing that stuff on the front end, man, goes a long way to kind of using them to your advantage on the fireground.
Absolutely. So I take a very academic approach to this job. I'm not afraid to say it. I'm a nerd about a lot of things, and I just want to be good at a lot of things because who knows what we're going to show up to. I just want to hopefully have something in the Rolodex that solves the problem. And so I have dove into a lot of those types of areas. And what you have to realize is the information is out there. It is. Guys like Kyle Smith out of Georgia, Jared Sturgey out of Virginia does a phenomenal class on fire protection systems for the street level firefighter. It's not just reading through an NFPA book at all for him. And he makes it incredibly easy to understand. And I learned a lot from the class that I took from him. I will say this. So I actually haven't taken the class specifically, but I've read some of the paperwork, and he just taught it at Andy Fredericks a couple of days ago. But Jordan Legan out of Seattle Fire has a master's in architecture, and he just started teaching a class called Wayfinding in Smoke. And that is kind of like your engine company's perspective of building construction, but obviously applied throughout the fire service. So the information is there. It's just a matter of knowing where to go and find those pieces of information, because it is all valuable. For me, high-rise standpipe firefighting has been somewhat new in the last couple of years. but it's something that I've absolutely fallen in love with. And it's something that I do on a daily basis. I would say that probably 3 to 4, if not upwards of 10 of our runs, it just depends on the day, obviously, will be in a standpipe equipped building. And what's unique about the particular role that I'm in right now is I have the ability to both act as an engineer and as a company officer. And so the roles are significantly different whenever you go through those particular things. It's also different based on the call type. Maybe this is just an automatic alarm versus a confirmed fire. My role as an engineer might be to go to that fire panel. It might be to go to the pump room and start mitigating some of these things from a systems perspective. If I'm that company officer, I better be able to realize really quickly, is the fire pump even running? Do I have multiple alarms coming in? It's not just what the initial display says on that panel. How do I alert the rest of the building to an incident going on in this particular location? Hey, this is not a drill, folks. Let's get to where you need to be, whether that's just stay in place, or hey, I need you to go to stairwell B for evacuation right now. Like, those are all roles that I could be thrown into at any particular time. And we got to recognize that it's not just something for the fire protection folks to worry about. These are a reality for the first in companies. It's a reality for second in companies. And, even as far as our high-rise SOG is concerned, they are specific roles broken down by arrival and what apparatus you're on. So let's say that I'm driving a truck one day and we're the second into a high-rise fire. I know as that engineer, I'm taking over elevators all of a sudden. So it's a whole new system that I got to be an expert at. And so don't be a chump. Recognize that if you've got it in your territory, you better be on your way to being an expert.
Yeah, well said, man. Don't be a chump. I mean, truly, I mean, like, it's not just the Fire Inspection Bureau's job. Like, it is absolutely our job to understand buildings and building systems. And, that's part of being a good firefighter. And, I can tell you, man, like, I've had a couple calls in my career that have kind of woke me up to the reality of, like, hey, you got to apply yourself to this stuff. Like, go get the information, like, find out. I can tell you, sitting in like classes at like HROC and places like that, like, learning about fire pumps and systems, or taking classes from other guys, or listening to different podcasts and things like that. The internet's been a great thing in a lot of ways, because it's opened up the door to have these conversations, or listen to people have these conversations, or teach these classes, even from your own home. A lot of times, you have access to recordings, things like that. Information is out there on YouTube, and there's a lot of good stuff out there. But I used to think, like I said, the first probably 6-8 years on the job, I just thought that's what the inspections guys did. That I don't even know all that stuff. That's not sexy. This isn't cool engine stuff. I'm not going and putting fire out. But then you get humbled on a couple calls, and I'll tell you, like, and here's the turning point for me. 2 calls. One, we had a call where we hooked up to the fire department connection, and I do my default pump it at 150, and I didn't do anything because I didn't realize, like, it took me literally, this is like, dude, I'm like probably, I don't know, 7-8 years on the job at this point. And before someone explained to me, like, if the fire pump's operating at higher pressure, you're not doing anything. You're just like deadheading your pump. Like I felt like such an idiot. I was like, I'm stupid because the fire pump set at 170. Thankfully it's doing its job. It's doing a fine job, but it wasn't until like that point in my career where someone was like, hey, you're not doing anything, right? You're literally just putting water stopped in a check valve.
You're burning up your pump is what you're doing.
Right. Congratulations. You're an idiot. And so I was like, hey, what? Because I was always told, hook up to the FDC, pump it at 150, right? That was like the rule of thumb. And like, it kind of took me back. I was like, no one's ever told me this. And this whole time in my mind, that year I was thinking I'm rock star, like, woohoo, I'm doing it. And I'm not at all.
Yeah.
So like, that was a call that we had. And then like a couple of years back, we had a high-rise fire, 14th floor. And the FDC actually rusted and fell off the side of the building. And which spawned a whole conversation. Thankfully, the fire pump did its job. Everything worked out fine with the standpipe. But the conversation that followed in the month or weeks that followed that fire was like, hey, let's have a little training thing on like what to do if the FDC is out of service. Like, what do we got to do? And so we started going into PRDs, PRVs. We started talking about options. I mean, everything from inspector test heads to, well stretch and hose up to a certain point. We talked about everything, man. And like, you start talking about systems and going into that stuff in detail. And I was fortunate enough to kind of pick Bill Gustin's brain a little bit. And, get a lot of his feedback and insight. And man, it's just, it evolved into this whole training thing that was really, it was awesome to put it all together, like, and present it to the department. Like, hey, like this is, plan. We literally, there's like 8 different options here. Like, this isn't the end of the world. Like, we can still operate, and here's why. And it was a really good conversation though. And it was one of those calls, I think, that just drives home the importance of like knowing your systems and how to work around if the system is malfunctioning, if there's problems in the system. And I don't know, man, like, like I said, to me, like, that kind of stuff excites me. Like, when those aha moments come on and you're like, hey, we worked through this, like, we're okay. Like, and then like when you see something like that happen again, you've been down that road, right? You've been down that worst case scenario, and you've, ad nauseum went through the details of how stuff works. And you start working through it, and you realize like, hey, there's a lot more to it than just hooking up the hose into a blind hole and hoping for the best, right? And and stuff like that, man. It's just like, as an engine, talk about bad weather. Like, man, you can make a day out of you could take a couple buildings in your first due, and you could literally spend hours just doing, walking through, looking at the systems and talking about, okay, if this goes down, what are you going to do? If you're faced with these, there's a situation like One Meridian Plaza, those guys with the PRVs and stuff, like, hey, if you're faced with this, how do you overcome this? Is there a way to work around this? And like, having those conversations as engine firefighters is so important, because like when guys are faced with something out of the norm, right, and they're faced with a really crappy situation, that they can recognize it faster, right? You're building that Rolodex in their mind of like, hey, okay, I'm not going to freak out. I've seen this before, or we trained on this, or we just talked about this last week, right? And so guys think, while our bread and butter is stretching and flowing, right? That is absolutely our bedrock of an engine company. There's so many other systems and things that come into play that affect our job, that affect the stretch, that affect putting the fire out, which is ultimately, here's the thing, like, we all want to be on the end of the nozzle putting out the fire, but you talk about the backup firefighter position. One of the most, like, in my opinion, the backup guy is more important than the guy in the nozzle. and I know it's not a popular opinion, but here's the thing. It doesn't matter if the guy on the end of the nozzle is not able to get to the fire and put it out, like, because you got a crappy guy in the back that's just sitting there, like, not really doing much. Like, my expression, I tell guys all the time, the backup guy fights the hose, the nozzle firefighter fights the fire. If it's the other way around, if the nozzle firefighter has to fight hose, they're not fighting fire. And they're getting tired, and their stream quality's going down. Like, they're not where they need to be. And we've all been there. Where you're on the nozzle and you're just like, holy cow, guys, come on, give me some line. And if you're in a system where that never happens, man, you are like all-star, A+, like rock star. Because like, I think anybody that's been on the job long enough has had those fires where you're like, all of a sudden you're like, man, I'm getting whooped here on the nozzle. Like, come on, guys, like, back me up. Or like, it's limited staffing, right? You go in, you got 2 guys on the line, and it's like, this guy's trying to manage 6 pinch points by himself. The officer's back here trying to flake hose and move hose. Like, you can only go so fast, right? There's only so much pull. And like I said, if you're fighting hose, you're not fighting fire.
I'm sitting here thinking that, do I agree with that statement or not? And I'm trying to think of, like, if I'm that backup firefighter and I'm doing a stellar job and I just got a knucklehead on the end of that nozzle, I still have the ability to get us there and steal the nozzle, and then I can do both.
Exactly.
But it's not happening the other way if that guy just can't get you to the seat,
Yeah.
So no. The backup is the most important.
Nobody wants to hear that, though. That's not a sexy position. That's not a sexy opinion, but it's true. Like, hey, like you said, if this guy sucks on the nozzle, like you said, you just get him where you need to go. Hey, get out of the way, rookie. I got this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's mine now.
Oh man. So just real quick, are you guys, I'm not sure, I'm trying to think back. I've been to Denver a couple times, but I'm trying to remember setup on your engines. Do you guys have crosslays?
So we do have crosslays on all of our apparatus. Whether or not they get used is another story. That's going to be kind of, district to district, station to station, how those are used. So on my particular apparatus, we have an 1 3/4 and we have a 2.5 crosslay. Both of those are where we keep our fog nozzles. And honestly, those will be primarily for situations where we're doing exterior type firefighting. So your car fires, dumpster fires, large gas leaks, those are when we're pulling those lines. Our interior firefighting is primarily done off of the tailboard. And we're pretty much always using smoothbore nozzles for interior work, whether it's from our static 2.5, or we do have a couple of pre-connected 1 3/4 lines as well. And then we use 3-inch supply, which is new to me. prior to coming to Denver, and I've really fallen in love with it, if I'm being honest with you. It's just incredibly versatile. It gets a lot of water downrange quickly. You're still able to position apparatus where they need to be. We do have 5-inch on our rig for those situations where we need to do big water as well. But for quick hit, tight territories, man, 3 inches is pretty fantastic as a supply line.
Are you guys running dual 3 inches, or is it just the single one to start? Or
the majority of our fire department is running dual 3-inch beds. Ours is one of 5 apparatus in the city that carries a bed of 3-inch and a bed of 5-inch as well. And really, we're never forward laying our 5-inch. It's pretty much always going to be a reverse out, whether that's from an appliance, another engine, or to something like a ladder tower.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. I got you. And are you guys, what kind of hose loads are you guys primarily running for your pre-connects and your hose beds? Is it bulk beds in the back mostly, or are you guys running, you said you had a couple pre-connects.
We do have pre-connects. Yeah. So our 2.5 is bulk load. So that's just kind of take and break, stretch, and then break it off in the back. Engineer gets to be involved a little bit more in that one. And it's really, it's territory to territory. And one of the things that I absolutely love about our engine culture is our department has given captains on the engine the authority to set up the rig how they want. So whether I go to, engine 20, engine 23, engine 3, engine 8, like they're all going to be slightly different. They're going to kind of tell us roughly how much hose they want on there, but how it gets loaded is a whole nother story. And I'm a big fan of that, because I came from a fire department where we had 93 stations that all had the exact same load, and they're trying to run that load in situations where they're going vertical to multifamilies. They're trying to run that load for high rises. They're trying to do that same thing for, an 800 square foot single story residence. So there's just not a lot of versatility to trying to make one type of load fit all of those different needs. And so giving the officers the ability to make those decisions based on where you work, heck yeah, I'm all for that. And if me as an engine firefighter, I go to a station where maybe I'm getting a different look than I'm used to, that's on me. I need to take some time first thing in the morning to be like, hey, talk me through this load, talk me through why you're doing it, and let's have a conversation about it. It kind of opens a lot of doors to learning. It opens some doors to figuring out new ways of doing things. And it really just makes you a better rounded individual when it comes to the fireground, seeing where these different loads fit the scenario. So on my particular engine, we have a lot of flat load. We have a couple of Minimans as well. And honestly, if it goes to the ground, they're the exact same load. They're only different if it's up on your shoulder. So as long as you recognize the similarities between them, life is easy.
Yeah, I like that, man. Two things that really stood out to me in just that little brief description there. You talked about the captains having leeway to kind of set up their rigs according to their jurisdiction, what like works best for their man. I cannot tell you how much I love that, because like having mostly, I've only experienced that in one place that I've ever worked, and I loved it because it's like, every jurisdiction is a little different, right? So if I'm in a mostly multi-residential, industrial, commercial, whatever, like that's a different setting than suburbia, cookie cutter housing districts, where, the typical setback, let's say I got a housing neighborhood that's, I'm covering that's mostly 50-foot setbacks with like nice, clean, manicured lawns, and it's mostly single story, or 2-story, ranch houses. Like that's a different animal than a high-rise multi, family dwellings and things like that, and commercial and stuff. Like it's just a different setting. And you talk about your area where there's 10-foot setbacks from the street. Like that's a huge difference between, like I said, suburbia, where you have a nice clean lawn with 60, 70 feet to the front door. Like it's just not the same. And to think that you could set every rig up the exact same and expect it to, because each load, there's benefits, right, to the different loads, right? I mean, depending on how you're running, the length of hose. I mean, I know some guys in departments that are running 300-foot pre-connects, and because out of necessity, because they're fighting a lot of fires that are beyond that traditional 200-foot or 150-foot pre-connect. And so for me, it's like, hey, if that works like best for your jurisdiction, like do it. Like make it work for you. And I wish more chiefs felt the same way, because there's a lot of places that it's just like, no, everything has to be uniform. Everything has to be the same. And it really it puts guys in a bad spot, because now, what works really good in this jurisdiction may not work as well in this setting. And I'll give you case in point. There's guys that, I know the triple layers come under fire the last few years. There's still a lot of departments that use the triple, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
in certain circumstances, it's fantastic. If you're in suburbia, when you got clean stretches, 50, 60-foot stretches typically, where you're able to clear the bed relatively easy, and you're not having to work a bunch of stairs and vertical and obstacles and all that stuff. Like, if that's your bread and butter and that's 90% of what you do, then it probably works really good for you. Take that same load and you put it in an urban setting where you got a crap ton of stairs and vehicles, and you're going vertical a lot, and you have a ton of obstacles. Like, all of a sudden it gets a little not so great. And that's where, having a shouldered hose load, I personally love the Minuteman. Like, a modified Minuteman is like, if I had Nick Pepper's fire department, that would probably be, at least where I fight fire here, would be like my golden egg, if you will, just because I do like having that 100 foot on my shoulder, where I can take it. And a lot of guys have started doing like the bundles with it, and like with pole loops and stuff, which is also great in certain circumstances. It gives you some versatility for front stretch and back stretch and things like that. But the point is, set it up based on your jurisdiction. I think, like, there's a lot of value in number one, it makes it better for you, right? Better for the citizen, because your stretches are going to go better and cleaner, right? And not only that, but there's some company esprit de corps, some pride that comes into setting your rig up. Hey, this is our house, this is our jurisdiction, this is our first due, and we have got this thing dialed in. This is what works for us really, really well. And so, like I said, I wish that more people felt that way. Unfortunately, that's not the reality for most of the fire service, but super, super great point. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about with you. So we talked about hose loads a little bit. I like the pulling stuff off the back. Same mindset. But for most of America, you're dealing with crosslays. Like, that is the bread and butter. And regardless, and this is kind of the point I wanted to circle back around to, is most of us aren't in a position to dictate how our rigs are spec'd or set up or things like that. Or, hey, we got crosslays versus off the rear end, whatever, the tailboard. This guy will, everybody has their favorite nozzle or hose or whatever. And, like, ultimately, you have to be good with what you have. And if you're limited because you have, set, like, this is how our crosslays are, this is the hose load the department went with, and, like, you feel like there's better solutions out there, all you can do is advocate for and educate, right? But at the end of the day, like, if the chiefs come down and say, hey, no, this is what we're doing, or the captain says, no, this is what we're doing, like, it is your job as a firefighter to become really, really good with what you have, and understand the limitations of your equipment. And I think a lot of guys get hung up on that, like, oh, like, we should have this, and this, and we should do this, and we should do that. And, like, ultimately, like, that's great, educate, advocate, but at the end of the day, like, you gotta, when it comes down to it, like, until that change is made, if it's ever made, it may never be made, right, how you think it should be, you have to be proficient with what you have. And if that means crosslays or triple speed lays or whatever, like triple A's, or your department's a flat low department, you feel like it should be something else, like, at the end of the day, like, you have to be proficient. Like, we can sit here and talk all day long, but it's not going to put the fire out. And so, I don't know, man, that's my soapbox. Like, I feel like guys get so hung up on, like, fog versus smoothbore or this, and trust me, like, do I feel like there's superior hose loads based on certain circumstances, different hoses, maybe a better grade hose, better nozzles, things like that? 100%. But it doesn't take away my responsibility as an engine firefighter to get really, really good with what I do have, and understand my limitations and the limitations of my equipment, and make it work to the best of my ability to put the fire out.
Right. And I was right there with you, man. For the first 10 years of my career, I was working with some kind of variation of a triple layer and 100 PSI fog nozzle. And like you said, I didn't have a choice in that. That was just what the department provided. That was what the department mandated and what the officers wanted on the rig. And, for 10 years, did I always know that was something that could be improved on? No, I didn't. But there were times, especially, I would say probably within the last 10 years of my career, that, man, I recognized that there were a lot of flaws to what the department was mandating. And, you know, you just kind of have to suck it up in some of those situations and make the best of it, like you said. And I get a lot of flack for this from guys that I teach with, but the very first article that I ever had published was on a modification of a triple layer load and a way that I found to make it more efficient, because we were trying to apply what I would call more of a suburban load in the urban environment. And so I figured out some tweaks to it, how to deal with short setbacks, how to deal with some obstacles and things like that. And that was done completely out of necessity, not because I'm a huge advocate of that particular load, but hey, like if this is you, like make it better in the ways that you are capable of doing that. And within that particular modification, like it looked the exact same loaded on the rig as what, you know, the engine company next door did. It was just, if you knew, you knew. You know, there was a slight little tweak that made life easier for everybody. And, you know, that's why I am now known as the triple layer guy. Some of the engine instructors out there still like me to talk about it, but
I've seen the video.
That's just the reality of it.
It's out there in the interwebs, man. It's going to be there forever.
It's there forever. And yeah, come talk to me if you want to know more about it.
Hey, buddy, I tell you, man,
but that's just the reality that we live in. And I mean,
Yeah,
hose loads is just one little example of that. You know, maybe it's the chainsaws that your department has decided. Like, I am not as big of a fan of the steel chainsaws as I am of the Husqvarna ones, but in terms of the rotary saws, but that's just the reality of what some departments purchase. And you just work within those confines, know what tweaks can be made along the way to make life easier for you. And then all the while, you know, slowly raise that bar. And when you get people in the right positions, you know, stay in their ear.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. So that is really key. I mean, like I said, you have to. I tell people all the time, and those two words, man. Like, you know, if you want to make change, understand change is very slow in the fire service, and you know, you attract more flies with honey than vinegar. You know, you can give the most impassioned like speech, but if you're an asshole about it, then like you know, people are probably gonna be like, hey, like, you know, what's up with this guy? You know, and the thing is, like, I've been there, man, like where you're just super, super impassioned about something, but you come off a little wrong, or like you get frustrated with guys because they don't see, you know, I'm showing you like this is better, like, you know, and like I would say this to anybody, you know, and it took me a number of years to figure this out as a firefighter, like, you know, stay the course, right? Just it's that 10 pounds of pressure 100% of the time. It's that little bit here, a little bit there. Understand there's no sweeping changes typically in the fire service. I mean, every once in a while something will come along, but more often than not, it's very slow. And if you want to see positive outcomes, then again, advocate and educate, but don't browbeat people. You know, understand like it takes time for them to digest. And if you just stay the course and are consistent, like that's going to drive more positive change than you jumping up and down on your soapbox every day. And you know, and like I said, not saying you don't discuss it, but you do it in a way that it's not threatening. It's not like, you know, and I don't know, man. Like I said, I've made some mistakes early in my career by getting really impassioned and really excited, and like the delivery just wasn't there. And you know what I'm saying was right, but how I was saying it and going about it wasn't necessarily the best way. And especially like if you're not in a position, you're not in a, you know, an officer position, or you're not in a chief position, right? To maybe push some of that stuff along a little bit faster. It's that much more imperative to do work as a firefighter. Like, you know, let your actions kind of speak for you, and then the words you do use, you do it in a respectful way and try to bring people along and like I said, not try to like force it down their throat, but more like, hey, a little bit at a time. It's that spoon feeding where all of a sudden the light bulb comes on for some of these guys. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Or you go to a fire and you ask questions and you kind of go down that road of like, hey, maybe this may have worked better. And the thing is, like, if guys may still say, no, that's stupid, we're not going to do it. But you know, I just actually just listened to a podcast with my brother Jeremy Sanders the other day about, you know, never underestimate the power of planting a seed. And I think that like when we talk about those you know, planting those seeds as a firefighter and those changes, understand it takes time for that seed to grow. It takes time for that stuff to, but you know, even the smallest little seed gets down inside of a rock, right? It'll split a giant boulder in half and a tree will grow out of it. Because over time, if you water it and like you let it grow and let it fester, and like eventually those roots start taking place, and it's a slow process, but that's the same way we have to approach it in our firehouses as firefighters. You know, we want to be change agents in our organizations for the better, right?
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, make sure that you're consistent with what you're saying and what you're doing, right? You live up to the standards that you're advocating for, right? And then, go about it in a way that, like I said, it's just a little bit of pressure all the time. You're always there. It's always that little voice in the background, like, hey, this could be better or whatever. But it's hard, man, especially if you're in a bigger organization, right? If you're in a big
It is.
department, getting stuff to be changed, man, is in any department is hard, but especially the larger, the more layers of the onion there are, like that's a very difficult thing to push. And so I do like the fact that, maybe you could even get it to a place where like, hey, maybe it's just a house by house thing. Like the captains get together and say, hey, chief, can we modify a little bit because this works better for us? That's still a win. Even if it's not a department wide change, if you can get your station or your shift or your battalion kind of working down that rabbit hole, and people see like, hey, that really works really well. And then it starts like, and firefighters are competitive by nature. We're very competitive. And if you see one battalion's like really like getting stuff done, like, man, those guys are dialed in, like the other battalion over time, they're going to take note and be like, hey man, like those guys are some hard charges over there. Like we got to like, and they may never say it to your face. They'll never be like, hey man, like you really, because it chaps them, right? The chaps. Nobody wants to be second best on the fire, right? Everybody, I feel like most guys want to be like the crew that's getting the kudos from the chief at the end of the fire. So, a little healthy competition sometimes goes a long way, and just showing up and ready to work, and letting your actions speak for you. But I'm sorry, I got on a rabbit trail there.
No, I'm totally with you. I mean, I'll give one example in my own fire department. We have it written in policy, and I think I mentioned it already, that thou shalt forward lay. And that's something that I would love to change, forward lay when appropriate. How about, but there's 5 levels of ranks between where I am right now and where that decision ultimately is probably going to land, and a couple decades worth of culture that has to change on top of that, and it's not for me to get hired day one in the academy and be like, hey guys, guess what? We need to change. Like, that's not how that happens occur at all. But that doesn't mean that that's a fight that you give up on at all. Like, stay the course if that's really what's going to be valuable for the fire department and valuable for the people who you're providing service to, which I truly feel like that is. But I mean, as long as it was, 2 decades worth of culture, maybe it's going to take a decade to reverse that, and you got to be okay with some of those situations, recognizing that, if like you said, that pressure, just that constant, and then, as you get more pieces of ammo on your side, as you get more people buying into it, you'll see that change is capable of happening. Just because you're up against a bunch of odds doesn't mean that that can't occur. And I mean, it's a lot easier at the company level, absolutely. And I got to experience that in a change from 100 psi fog to using 15/16 in a fire department that used nothing but the high pressure fog. But it starts at the company level. It starts on the drill ground and some of those things to buy over, the company officer, and eventually maybe affecting the battalion, and then who knows from there. But it doesn't mean give up on it, but it does mean that it's going to be a long game, and you got to go about it the right way. With that, also, what I noticed is you got to be accountable to being on your game, because the second you present that in a way that is not effective is the second that thing gets shot down for a long time. So be willing to really give it some time to make sure that you are absolutely dialed before you just go in guns blazing saying that this is the way we need to do things.
Yeah, you got to be able to. I mean, firefighters, we're a tough crowd sometimes. Like, you've got to really make sure you got your ducks in a row, like you said, and have really kind of vetted and thought through this process, because otherwise you will get exposed pretty quick. We are notoriously quick to point out BS, in the firehouse. So dude, I could tell you, man, like, I got some notes here. I'm just like looking at all this stuff. Okay, so a couple more things, and I know it's been a great 90 minutes already, but I just want to like kind of get your thoughts. You brought up 15/16. So are you guys using 15/16s for your 1 3/4 lines now? Is that what you guys flow? Okay.
Yeah, we're using 15/16 on our rig.
And what do you guys, as far as your 2.5, what are you guys using?
So our department is actually in the middle of a pretty big transition, I would say. So historically, we've been an 1 1/8" fire department, and in the last couple of months, we are shifting over to using exclusively 1 3/16 off of all of our lines, both off the rig and off of our standpipe packs. So that's a pretty big change, and one that I think will will take a while to really see what comes of that, both positively and negatively. I feel like, but yeah, I think being open to change is good in that regard.
So let me get your thoughts on this then. I mean, so two things. Obviously, you're using smooth bores primarily for
Mm-hmm.
structural firefighting, which I'm a big fan of. Obviously, I just for a lot of reasons. I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
we could spend 2 hours talking about the science behind larger drops of water.
Mm-hmm.
Getting reach and penetration, getting to the seat of the fire, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I want to get your thoughts on specifically, 15 16 obviously is what you guys are using for your 3/4. I'm kind of a 7/8 guy myself, but I'm also in a staffing situation where I feel like the 7/8 tends to we most of the time we have two guys, an officer and a firefighter
Mm-hmm.
on a hand line. For us, like I said, the 7/8, like if I had my perfect scenario for us, it would be a 7/8, just because a lot of times that firefighters by themselves on the line,
Mm-hmm.
and it just seems to translate really well from my past experience and stuff. But I do like the conversation about it, like the difference in the 15 16s versus the 7/8s. And then we'll dive into that for a second. Then I wanted to we'll kind of talk about the 2.5 and the different nozzle tips for that.
Mm-hmm.
But for in your experience, like let's say in a shorter staff situation, do you still feel like the 15 16ths would be preference, or would you probably lean more towards the 7/8s? And there's no wrong answer here, obviously, but there's a lot of debate, right, in the fire service
There
on
is.
what's the better inch 3/4 line nozzle based on nozzle reaction and flows and things like that. There's been whole departments have done whole studies on it when
Mm-hmm.
you introduce kinks and friction points, and there's a lot of information, and I feel like the 7/8 versus 15 16ths is almost like the new fog versus smooth bore. It's like it's the
Yeah,
debate within the debate.
it
And
is.
so I just want to get your opinion on it. I want to get your thoughts on where you feel the strengths and weaknesses of both, and do you feel like in a shorter staffing situation your opinion may change on like what you would like to see versus where you're at now? I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
I guess you've got that experience in the back of your head from a smaller department, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in that situation, would you still advocate a 15 16th, or would you be more of a 7/8 guy? I'm
Oh
just
man.
curious.
It's kind of interesting because I feel like the 7/8 and 15 16 debate is exactly the same as inch and an eighth and inch and 3/16 debate. If you can fall on one side for the smaller hand lines, you're going to have to come up with the same arguments for the bigger hand lines as well, because it's basically the exact same argument for each of those tip sizes. So I see it from both people's perspectives. It's undeniable that the 7/8 is easier to move. It's undeniable. But we have people with the abilities to just be rock stars with the 15 16ths as well. I will say that you can't build an attack package just based on the rock stars that you have on your fire department, though. And so for a lot of people, what that means is you better have the staffing to back up the decision to go with the higher GPM if you don't have a fire department of just absolute studs on it in choosing the 15 16ths. To throw another wrench into it, I'll be completely honest with you. A lot of times we underpump our 15 16ths a little bit, and what that looks like is maybe we're taking it to the second or to the third floor and we're not doing any adjustments in terms of elevation. So all of a sudden we do have an underpump 15 16ths line that's operating way more like a 7/8
Yeah.
in that regard. And the benefit to that is once again, it becomes a more manageable line in terms of nozzle reaction and our ability to flow it. But there's a little bit more margin there, I feel like, if you were to get that kink that you aren't paying attention to. With the 7/8, you get one kink and all of a sudden you're creeping real close to that 150 mark that most of us want to stay above. So there's obviously pluses and minuses to it. So yeah, a smaller department where you don't have staffing and you don't have, just a team always. Yeah, maybe 7/8 is the way to go. And maybe 7/8 is the way to go even for your bigger fire departments too, because we know there's a bunch of slugs there also. But for me, I feel like I've put a lot of effort into my ability to flow water, and I'm very comfortable using the 15 16ths. And even by myself, like I said, I want my backup 15, 20 feet down the line. I'm more than comfortable flowing that line. Could I do it better with the 7/8? I don't know. It's going to be dependent on the fire that we go to, because ultimately it's the size of the fire that's going to dictate how much water we need to put down range. It's not my preference.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and here's the thing. Like, I know we're like guys will say you're splitting hairs.
We are.
And we are. But I think that's the beauty of this stuff. Like, get into it. And I do think, like I said, you made a good point that you have to design your attack package, not based on your rock stars, but based on the medium, if you will, of kind of where people are in your job. And your staffing levels obviously come into that play. If you typically find your nozzlemen on the hose line by themselves quite a bit, you could probably argue that maybe a little less nozzle reaction might be a good thing. And we know, like, from studies, I know was it Paul Grimwood, that his numbers were a lot less than like Frederick's. They 70 pounds for basically the ideal for one firefighter, and most guys with two guys can handle up to like 100 pounds, give or take a few pounds. To me, that seems to be the experience that I've had. Like, seems like that 70-pound mark is about the sweet spot for most firefighters to be comfortable, which is great. Like you said, if you're pumping your 15, 16s at the desired 50 psi at the tip, that's great. And you're right there, the 69 pounds or whatever, you're kind of in the sweet spot. And I know for people that advocate more for the 7/8 and limited staffing, the push is like, if you over pump and pump a little hot on that 15, 16s, now you're talking like 80, I think 82, 83 pounds of nozzle reaction, which gets a little hot. They're like, it's a hot line to hang on to if you're over pumping it. But then the proponents will say that you under pump it a little bit and you have essentially a 7/8, you're getting 165 GPM and you're only 55 pounds of nozzle reaction. So it's like, I think it's really comes down to training. And it comes down to your pump operators being on their game. If as a driver operator that those guys, maybe you don't have your rock star nozzle firefighter that shift, right? They're new, they're still learning, right? Maybe dialing it back a little bit, give them a little less, and then kind of slide it up from there if you need to. Again, it comes out of the fire too, right? Because here's the thing: is it a fire that we can, hit and then move, or is it a fire that we got to flow and move and really make a push? Because that's another thing all in and of itself. And you talk about that skill set, when you have to make a push and keep the line open and flow and move as you go, that nozzle reaction can come back to get you pretty quick if you're not comfortable with it and not used to managing it. So I like the debate. I think that, like I said, guys, 7/8 is America's tip or whatever, and guys go back and forth with it. At the end of the day, like, the nice thing, like I said, the insurance, I think the pros of the 15, 16 is you do get more GPM. You do get a little bit extra insurance if you have minor kinks and things like that. But the 7/8, like I said, you could argue that you could just over pump it a little bit and still be in that 70-pound, 72 pounds nozzle reaction and get those close to those 7 or 15, 16 flows. So I don't know. Like I said, I love the debate because I think it is awesome when you get to the place where guys are splitting hairs over like,
a 16th of an inch is what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So don't ever let anybody tell you 16th of an inch isn't a lot. So
right.
But the conversation, I like that you brought up the inch and 3/16. Traditionally, I've always operated with the inch and 1/8 has been kind of our go-to for the 2.5. The inch and 3/16 is relatively newer to the fire service, but I like it because it's kind of that sweet spot. Because here's the thing: like, I know if you do like the Freeman ratio, like 1.25 inch tip is actually the ideal nozzle tip for a 2.5. But most guys cannot handle, like, with limited staffing, like 328 GPM is awesome, like it's great. But when you're talking 123 pounds of nozzle reaction at 50 psi. And God forbid if you over pump it, dude. If you over pump it, we're talking like master stream level flows with like pushing up on 150 pounds of nozzle reaction is a ton, right? And so like most guys get like that creates a lot of insecurities. So like a lot of people like the smaller tip size just because it gives them a little bit more control. But I think I've always been a big fan. I like the tips, like being able to like screw off the tip, have like your ND tips and stuff like that to give you a little bit of options. But I know that for simplicity's sake, a lot of departments have gone away from the stack tips and going more to like, hey, I'm just going to have one size. That way the pump operator knows exactly what they need to pump it every time. And there's a lot to be said for that. But I just want to get your thoughts on, handling the 2.5 as much, like that's kind of become your baby. Like that's the medium diameter lines.
Yeah.
For you, like in a utopia world, what is your preferred tip size for the 2.5, and why? And then like for real world like situations for most of us operating in
Mm-hmm.
three guys on an engine and waiting a minute or two for another engine to show up. Do you feel like the inch and 3/16 is still a better option than inch and 1/8, or do you kind of lean towards like that middle ground more, even with shorter staffing?
So I've really had to try to solidify some of my thoughts on this, and it's kind of difficult, especially as we start adding in different diameter of lines into the mix. So you mentioned that I teach a class called Attack of the 2.5, and I've taught that nationwide for roughly 6 years now. And the reality is that we have so much more than 2.5 now for what we're going to consider our large hand line. And that falls anywhere between like 2 inches in nominal diameter all the way up to like 2.8 inches are being called hand lines. And it's really difficult to sort through a lot of that. So in kind of exploring that, I've actually created another class just called The Engine Company's Guide to Large Hand Lines, just so that we can kind of dive into some of these decision-making processes and understand what the intended use is for each of these different line sizes. And obviously that kind of incorporates what tip you put on the end of it, because you could get any one of those hand line sizes with 2.5-inch couplings on the end of it, and you can put whatever 2.5-inch nozzle and tip size you want on that, but they're going to act dramatically different depending on how much pressure and how much volume you're trying to push down those lines. And so I kind of see that as an update to the whole 2.5 class that I teach. But really, if you're talking about large hand line flows, I really think that for one and even two people on the line, you should be somewhere between 225 GPM and a max of about 300 GPM. Like you said, flowing an 1.25-inch tip at 50 PSI sounds fantastic, but in reality, that's just heart crushing. You're not going to keep that line open very long at all. And even as you push towards that 300 gallons per minute, it really becomes quite the task for what's a lot of times is a single firefighter trying to manage that by themselves. So I kind of keep that hand line flow kind of in that range of 225 to 300. Me personally, why I really like flows around 265 is because it seems like for the majority of hand lines that I operate, I am capable of now flowing and moving that line. As I go upwards in GPM and upwards in pressure, obviously nozzle reaction is going to increase as well. And that's just becoming more than I'm capable of being able to flow and move that line. Yes, I can be static with higher volumes, but I want that as an option if the situation dictates it. I'll be completely honest. I've never been on the fire where I had to flow and move a 2.5-inch line. That hasn't been the reality. My reality for 2.5 fires has pretty much been hit and move, but I still want that in my wheelhouse for those situations where I feel like it might be beneficial. So I kind of like that flow range around 250, 260 for that particular reason. Now, whether that's being done with an 1.1/8 or an under pumped 1 3/16, I mean, by the textbook, yeah, the nozzle reaction is actually less on the 1 3/16 being under pumped, but it's still within my capabilities as a nozzle firefighter to do either one of those. Because I feel like that's within my capabilities, I don't see the need of doing something like a 2-inch line only flowing 210 gallons per minute out of a 1-inch tip. And I'm not an anomaly by any means. Like, I'm a small dude. You mentioned nozzle reactions in the 150-pound range. Like, that's how much I weigh, so I'm not an outlier. Like, this is
you're coming off the ground at that point. Like you're taking a ride.
And I say that to say that, like, it's within the capabilities of pretty much every firefighter in the fire department, because I'm at the bottom. All right. Everybody else is up here compared to me. So if I have the ability to flow, 250, 260 gallons per minute, I might as well be doing that. And if it's not necessitating that, then I'll go to an 1 3/4 line. I just don't see going below that 250 mark when it's within my capabilities. The other thing that does is it puts me in a hose line size that's more versatile as well. And what I mean by that is we can start talking about things like our bigger tip sizes. We can start talking about our rapid attack monitors, the portable monitors flowing upwards of 500 GPM. That's not in the wheelhouse of something like a 2-inch line or a Super 2, if you want to call it one particular manufacturer's hose design. And so I like having that versatility that comes with choosing a little bit bigger line size, but one that also isn't burdening us down with way too much weight, isn't burdening us down with way too much nozzle reaction as well. So that probably puts me somewhere in the range of 2.25 upwards to, like a true 2.5 being my favorites with either one of those tip sizes, really. When it comes to like a whole stack setup, I'm probably a little bit different than you on that. I've seen too many situations where guys forget to take off that small tip and leave that 1-inch tip on there. And then the other side of that is the coordination that it takes back and forth over the radio, trying to get a hold of the pump operator to make those fine adjustments, for it to be worth it for me to unscrew, an 1 1/8 tip and go to 1.25 tip. I feel like it simplifies the process a little bit to go with the 1 3/16 if you're looking for that more residential flow to commercial flow to defensive operations, all being done on the same hand line.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's a good explanation. I think that having that one tip size does simplify the pump operation thing. And here's the thing: you could always over pump a little bit, right, to get a little more GPM. Under pump if you need a little less, right, take that off. So I see the value in that. Like I said, I think maybe it's just a little nostalgia for me because I just kind of grew up with the tips like that, being able to, and so, but yeah, at the end of the day, like I said, you gotta do what's going to work best for your operation. And like I said, if you have too much radio chatter and it's, like I said, if it's a back and forth thing where you're having like, hey, we unscrewed this tip or we unscrewed that, because like when I did have stack tips, just a disclaimer, I'd always take the 1-inch tip off. It was always like one of those, take it off. We start with 1 1/8, and then if we need to go up to 1.25, we would. So that was kind of even with the stack tips, it wasn't truly starting because, like I said, there's really no point. And I have this conversation all the time. Why are you going to pull a 2.5-inch hand line with a 1-inch tip flowing 210 gallons per minute, get all the extra weight and nozzle reaction, but get especially if you got a 15/16 on your 1.75, right? Like the payoff, it just isn't worth it to go from
not at all
185 gallons per minute to 210. And here's the thing: if I just double a couple guys on the 15/16 1.75, I'm flowing 200 gallons a minute plus. And so, like, why do I want all this extra weight just for a very little trade off? And so, like, you kind of came up under brush, right? So obviously, the exponential engine, his mindset with that of kind of like essentially doubling your flows every time you step up. Just want to get your thoughts on that. I mean, I like it. I think it's a good way to simplify things. Like, hey, if this is an 1 3/4 fire, we're looking for that 150 to 160 GPM flow. If we're going to the a 2.5 fire, I want that right at that 300 GPM mark, right? Essentially doubling my flow. And then again, if you're going to a deck gun, let's make it worth our while. Let's essentially go to 600 gallons per minute plus. I like it. It's simple, but you get a lot of discourse on that. You go around, you teach, and guys like, hey, 300 gallons per minute is too much on a 2.5, and like, we want the 1-inch tip because we don't have a lot of staffing. And it's like, but are you getting your bang for your buck? When it comes to heat release rates and energy absorption, heat absorption capacity of our streams, like, when we start breaking it down, again, is it worth flowing 200 210 gallons a minute on a 2.5 for a bigger line? You're not really doing much better than you would have been with a smaller line. I don't know. I just want to get your thoughts on the thought process with the exponential engine, and then like as far as the argument that it's too much nozzle reaction to full 300 gallons per minute on a 2.5. Is that more of a training thing, you think, or is that just like, are guys, do they have a valid argument there? Or is it just like we're just too lazy to go out and train and get good at it? I mean, because I know where I lean, and I'm not saying guys are bad firefighters or anything like that. I just think like people get this like mental training scars of like with the 2.5, like they just got smoked in fire academy, and so like they're scared to pull it because in so many places like guys are like, oh no, that's too much work, right? And so they get this whole argument of 1 3/4 is the same thing as a 2.5, like. we don't need to pull 2.5. And I just want to, all the stuff that, I want you to debunk all those arguments. I want you to, like, when you're going through and you hear that stuff as an instructor, what are your responses to those? So when people say we don't have staffing and we don't have, or it's too much nozzle reaction, or it's just too big of a line, it's too cumbersome. Like, what are you, when you're teaching guys to be comfortable with that line, what are the things that you try to educate them on to maybe steer that thought process? Because like I said, a lot of guys, when you bring up pulling 2.5, like there's this instant surround and drown intimidation factor of I'm about to get smoked on this hand line. And maybe part of that is just guys not training enough with it. Maybe part of it's like the attack packages. They got these 100 PSI, 1985, like 100 PSI automatic fog nozzles on there that are like ungodly nozzle reaction, maybe that's part of it. But what are some of the things that you do to help guys become more comfortable and maybe change the paradigm and the outlook on the medium diameter hose? Because there is a lot of pushback on that. There's a lot of those things that get thrown out there. And I think a lot of it's just maybe a training issue more than anything, like just kind of getting guys to break down that wall of like, hey, this isn't just a surround and drown line. This is not, it doesn't have to be a bad experience every time you pull it.
I agree. And I mean, going back to the whole exponential engine concept, like I'm a big believer in that. And what I love about it is it simplifies things. Now, do you have to hold to the specific GPMs? No, I don't practice that in my own fire department. So it would be wrong of me to say, yeah, you need to be flowing 150, 300 and then 600. But there's so much validity within that. If you're talking about, 7/8, inch and 3/16, and then using your 1.5 tip for your deck gun. And so, yeah, I love the simplicity that it brings, and it helps out the decision-making process so much for that officer, because you're not throwing additional things into the mix. Like, let's say a 2-inch line and a 2.5 line. And, what if we overpump? What if we underpump? No, like there's just something to be said about the simplicity of working within the intent, I guess you could say, of the exponential engine concept. So I am a big believer in staying relatively close to that, and more importantly, putting some distance between your hand line sizes when it comes to your target flows, because then you're not second guessing yourself nearly as much. And that if you are taking the opportunity to pull a bigger line, that it is going to have a significant impact, and it's not just going to tickle it as opposed to the line that you were losing with beforehand. So if you're not familiar with it, please seek out exponential engine. I think that CF Tactics has posted that entire class on their website now. So get familiar with the intent of that concept. So if we're talking specifically about our bigger hand line sizes, I think the 100 PSI fog nozzle is what made the American Fire Service absolutely hate 2.5. Like, that is the reason. And in traveling and getting to explore that a little bit, I think the biggest thing that can help somebody get comfortable is choosing the right nozzle to pair with your line. And so I don't get into the weeds, like I said, too much about the whole smooth and fog nozzle debate, but where I will die on a hill on is the difference between a high pressure and a low pressure attack package. And at this point, whether it's smoothbore or fog, the options are available for you to run a low pressure system out of your bigger lines. And then all of a sudden you're getting the high volumes. You've changed nothing in terms of GPM, but you've done everything for your firefighters and making it easier for them to keep that line open. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I could do for somebody, is put a line in their hand operating around 50 PSI as opposed to, 100 PSI at the tip. And again, you're not losing anything in terms of volume. You're not really losing anything in terms of reach. You could argue some penetration a little bit, but the reality is you're going to be able to keep that line open so much longer just simply by using a low pressure attack system. So that's number one. Number two is really getting into how to hold on to a hose line. I've found that a lot of people just aren't as good as they think they are. And the fact is you can get away with so many things with the 1 3/4 that you cannot get away with the 2.5. And so all of a sudden, when you put them on that bigger line that they're just not getting out and training with, those training scars, or those weaknesses, you could call them, are exposed immediately. And one thing that I like to do with most people is, especially if those people who feel really confident is how confident are you now moving them different directions, because it's not just spraying water right in front of you. And so that's one thing that I've incorporated into all of my classes is just spending the initial parts of all we're going to do is we're going to stay static, and we're going to flow water in front of us in multiple positions, but we're also going to flow water to the sides of us. And simply just making somebody flow 90 degrees away from where they initially started is typically enough for them to get outside of their comfort zone. And it's incredible how just a simple little tweak can make the difference there, where I'm like, okay, so now your target is 90 degrees to the left of you. Now your target is 90 degrees to the right of you. And that can be enough even to help people recognize that, oh man, like this is not nearly as easy as I, expected just coming onto the drill field this morning. And so, yeah, it takes reps to get comfortable with that. And really the big thing with the large hand lines is keep them low. Anytime people try to lift the line up off of the ground while it's flowing or try to stand up with that line, you're getting crushed for no reason. By allowing the earth, allowing the weight of that line to absorb that nozzle reaction, build up more friction, it makes life so much easier for you. And it's kind of funny where you could even get, like a small child flowing a 2.5 just simply by, dropping a knee on it and keeping that nozzle reaction low and grounded.
Yeah, well said, man. And I think it goes back to mechanics, right? Mechanics trumps muscle every day. Like,
Absolutely.
you can muscle a small diameter hand line, and people do it all the time, and make up for bad habits, bad technique, right? And you hit it on the head, because the minute you put that bigger hand line in their hands, all the technique deficiencies get exposed, because you can only muscle a 2.5 for so long. Like, if you're not using sound mechanics, not using your big muscle groups, not using, letting the weight of the hose, the reaction force transmit to the ground, and staying low, like you said, you get wore out pretty quick, and it turns into a battle. Like I said, you're fighting the hose more than you are the fire, and like I said, people walk away like feeling defeated, and it's like, look, good mechanics trumps muscle all day, every day, because muscle gets tired. It does. I mean, and if I think is it Fields that talks about using your skeleton all the time, like, using geometry, using your skeleton. Like, I love it, man. It's because it's so true. Like, bones don't get tired. I think it's one of his things. He talks about, your bones don't get tired, your muscles do. So there's a lot of truth to that. And man, like I said, when it comes to big lines, or I say big lines, medium diameter hand lines, and guys have got to realize, like you said, that if you just take a little bit of time to think about your placement of how your body's set up, where the hose is transmitting energy to, how that nozzle reaction is getting, pushed back into the ground, or is your body taking the bulk of it, or is the ground taking the bulk of it, right? I think the big takeaway. But it is cool to watch people when the light comes on, when they start realizing, like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of pulling this line. Like, I can actually do work with it, and it is satisfying to see. I just want to get your thoughts real quick on, so, in the last, probably, I don't know, well, probably the better part of 10 years now, but in particular, the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a big push for 2-inch and 2.25, some intermediate, if you will, medium size hand lines. What are your thoughts on some of those lines? I know, like, so I've messed with the 2-inch, I messed with the 2.25. It seemed like the 2-inch friction loss, once you get beyond like 300 feet, gets kind of sketchy with pump pressures and friction loss and reaction force when you get those higher flows. If you're trying to push closer to that 300 GPM mark, it really gets sketchy. The 2.25, I felt like handled really well in that sweet spot of that 240 to 280 from my experience with it. But I just want to get your take on it. I mean, you're playing with stuff all the time. Do you feel like those lines in a limited staffing situation, if you're in like maybe suburbia, would be more advantageous than a 2.5? Or you kind of mentioned having two different options, like a 2-inch and a 2.5 and all this stuff. I know there's departments that have messed with having one of each to give them options, residential versus commercial. Do you think that muddies the water too much? Do you think it's is worth the squeeze to have those slightly smaller hand lines? And in your experience, like, is it still better just like, hey, if we're going to step up to the bigger line, like, let's just make it a 2.5 and call it good, and, like, get that bigger flow? Or is it like, hey, for most of residential suburbia America, maybe this is a better option for them
Mhm.
than the traditional 2.5, which we know, unless it's like truly, internal diameter, like truly 2.5, you got hose, like you said, up to 288. I mean, massive interior swell on these hoses. So, I think that's a big thing, right? I mean, that's obviously, it adds weight, it adds reaction, it adds, so in a suburban setting, do you think that these other options that have kind of come into the fire service over the last few years have a place, or if you're setting it up, like let's say you were back in Nebraska and you were setting up for your situation there, would you still lean towards that bigger gap between your smaller hand lines and your medium hand lines?
So obviously there's a lot to unpack there. There's a ton to unpack, and it really comes down to, what am I asking this line to do? Am I asking it to just come off of a bed and put out the majority of my, commercial exposures? If that's the case, then yeah, let's have a conversation about using one specific line size to handle my typical stretches. But as soon as I start having to incorporate things like portable monitors, standpipe equipped buildings, other things, like, the conversation has to be expanded a little bit. But I'll say this, like, there's absolutely room for these handline sizes in the American Fire Service. There is. And there's some guys in Ohio who are probably going to be upset with me for saying this, but I'm not a big fan of the 2-inch. Especially now with having a 2.25-inch option on the market. And they'll argue, oh, well, what do you think the interior diameter of a 2-inch line is? It's pretty stinking close to the 2.25. But the reality is you're getting the benefits of the weight reduction with the 2.25-inch line, and you're getting a more stout hand line. There's just more material there to help absorb it. And so I feel like its flow range has got better potential. Its friction loss benefits are a little bit better. So because there's a 2.25 on the market now, I'm not a huge fan of considering 2-inch line options. That's just the reality. If it is a situation where, this is my department, they mandate, this is what we get, I would highly suggest that you explore the 1/16 tip. Again, we're arguing 16ths of an inch here, but it makes a big difference. And I mentioned earlier that I feel like the bottom end of our big line flow should be 225 GPM. And that comes from pumping an 1/16 tip at 40 PSI. It's a very manageable line when you pump it at 50 PSI and you're getting 240 GPM out of it. And now we're getting really close to what our 1.1/8 tip is capable of doing. And so that's where some of those 2-inch guys really start to get in your ear a little bit on why their line is so much better. But yeah, I think if you're using a 2-inch line, it better have an 1/16 tip on there, because that's going to do so much more for you than the 1-inch tip is. And you're still getting the same benefits with a manageable line. I think the 2.25 is going to be used more and more and more in the American Fire Service, just because it fits the need of suburbia. It fits the needs of rural America. And that's what the American Fire Service is really made up of at this point. It's not just urban firefighting at all. Even though we look to a lot of those urban departments to make decisions, like the 2.25 is phenomenal when it comes to that weight reduction. It's undeniable. And I've got a number written down here. It's a difference of about 40 pounds per 100 feet of hose. And you can't deny that makes life better for you, getting the same volume if you're pairing both of those lines with an 1.1/8 tip to begin with. The other thing is especially in tighter spaces, when you're talking about interior firefighting, you can fit so much 2.25 hose into that space. It makes the stretch so much easier than trying to force what wants to be a telephone pole of a 2.5 into that same space. So as I get out more and more and get to play with that line, it really shows itself when it comes to interior operations, especially the flowing and moving capabilities of a line at over 250 GPM. So I think that's pretty awesome. But once again, it comes down to, what am I asking this thing to do? Because it's simple math for me when it comes to some of this stuff. If you're putting that thing on a standpipe outlet that's only going to give you 65 to begin with, regardless of my feelings on its maneuverability, regardless of my feelings on, how it feels in my hands as I'm going left, right, up, down, all of those things, If the system's not going to give it to me, the system's not going to give it to me. And if I don't have, let's say, a 3-inch line as a supply operation for a portable monitor, then I can't ask the 2 1/4 to do that, because we're getting into theoretical realms when it comes to pumping 500 GPM out of that thing. It could be a situation where we only may be able to get 100 feet away from our rig to pump 500 GPM through a line like that. So we really got to explore what hand lines and even what supply lines we're putting on our engine to incorporate the full need of what fire tech is, because it's not just simply going interior with an 1 3/4 line to our typical house fires. Engine companies got to be better than that. We got to be thinking through each of those processes a little bit more. So yeah, please have the conversation about some of these smaller diameter lines, but recognize that we can't make them fit every single scenario. And the opposite side of that is we can't build a rig that has an 1 3/4 line, a 1.88 line, a 2-inch line, a 2 1/4 line, a 2.5 line, and a 2.65 line. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. Simplicity is the answer there. And so if I'm building an engine for Jonathan Brumley Fire Department, I'm really looking at 2 hand line sizes, hoping that it fits the need. And then there might be one outlier scenario. Like, let's say that I do have an exposure of standpipes that were built, let's say prior to 1993, that aren't giving me the pressures that I need to. Maybe I have a couple of packs built for that one specific scenario, and it's defined in our fire department why we have that line size, when it will be used. But for the majority of the rest of the time, let's say we pull a 2 1/4 line and flow 265 off of our rig, and we're getting roughly the same flows in those scenarios where we know it's going to win for us. But we have to take a holistic approach to it. And it's not just what's comfortable. It's not just, crying about staffing. No, it's simple math problems. Like, can the hose do what we need it to do? And if it can't, then it shouldn't be on our rig.
Dude, yeah, that's I have nothing to add. that was well said, man. You got to set it up for what you have to do, right? And what you're going to be expected to do with your hand lines, and that's it. Like, at the end of the day, like, you can't expect, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Sometimes you have to set up for, obviously what your most likely scenarios, but also you got to look at some of those things. Like, do we have, old standpipe systems? Do we have, systems that are going to be low pressure, or are we using, and here's another case in point, because like a lot of departments, when I was in Florida, did a lot of like our courtyard stretches with our 2.5. So we pull our 2.5 out and put a thief or something on it and extend off the line, or a reducer or whatever. And if you're using it for that scenario, right, that two, guys, I got a 2-inch line for residential flows or whatever, I can hit my 240 gallons a minute. We're good. But if you're talking about supplying additional hand lines down, 400 feet away from the rig, right, and a garden apartment or something like that, it's a different animal. If you're doing a lot of courtyard, long driveways, things like that, like, again, what is your line going to be expected to do? And if it's not just your pre-connect, right, it's not just, we pull up in this strip mall is going, it's, are we doing courtyards? Are we doing standpipe systems? Are we, how are we using this line? Like you said, it just, dude, you hit it on the head. I mean, you have to spec your stuff out according to what your operation is. And if that's something you do on the regular, or even if you just do it a couple times a year and it's something that is a common tactic in your department, you have to at least address those things too. It can't just be like, oh, this is great, this makes our life easy, like you said, but then I can't do the other 3 things that I need to do with this line. Where's the trade-off, right?
Yeah. Like I said, it's a holistic approach, taking into account each of your exposures and each of the fires that you do on the regular. And the hose has to fit the need. And if it doesn't fit the need, maybe there is the opportunity to add, one line for one particular scenario. But then again, you're talking about, is it worth it for me to, and this is a conversation that's going on in my fire department right now. Is it worth it to buy a single length of hose for one specific scenario when maybe another length of hose of a different diameter can do that job, and we've already got it anyway? Well, that's a conversation that we got to have, and that's a budget issue as well for many departments as well. But again, like, as much as we can simplify the decision-making process, I think that's the way to go with it.
Yeah, man, simplicity is it's what's that saying about it being the simplicity is the greatest, expression of I'm trying to think
I
of
know
it.
exactly. It's a Da Vinci quote, and I can't come
Yeah.
up with it off the top of
Yeah.
my head right now either.
Yeah,
And it's a part of the exponential engine class that I've
it
taught
is.
many times.
I know. I'm sitting here drawing a blank. It'll come to me in like 20
I
minutes when we're
know.
done. So,
We'll
but
just recognize that I'm an idiot right now.
hey, there's a lot of stuff swirling around here, man. We've been
Yeah.
talking engine nerd stuff for a while, but yeah, no, dude, it's it's been a great conversation, man. It really has. I think that when you start talking about getting into the details of what we do as engine companies, it really is like there's a lot more to it, like I said, than putting water on the red stuff. Like when you start looking at the hydraulics behind what we're doing and just little things like nozzle reactions, weights, you start talking like, hose performance, pairing nozzles with hose. I mean, the Freeman ratio, all this stuff like building systems and construction, like there's so much to dive into. And I love it. I love to see the amount of engine stuff that's getting pushed out there now because there's so much good information out there stuff to and really at the end of the day though you have to digest this stuff, and this is why I would advocate anybody listening to the podcast go out there and like put your hands on this stuff, right? Look at your fire department, look at your operations, look at your staffing, and work on stuff that works best for your organization based on your SOGs, your staffing, your personnel. Find like I said, what works for me may be slightly different than you. I mean, there's some universal truths that come into play, right, when it comes to line management, but set yourself up for success. If you're in a position to make recommendations, do your homework, do your research. There's tons of good information. If you have questions about anything we talked about today, I don't, reach out to Jonathan. I mean, I'm sure he'd be glad to field some questions, and answer more if you got more questions or want to talk to him about a class. I'm sure he'd, we can maybe get you in 12 states next year, right? So
let's do it.
So that being said, man, like I said, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Obviously, really nerd out on this stuff. I enjoy it. It's fun. It's definitely been an enjoyable 2 hours here. But we're gonna wrap it up with our rapid fire questions. So rapid fire. This is unscripted. This is Jonathan Brumley, unhinged. So you ready for the rapid fire questions, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, here we go. All right. What is your favorite position on the fireground?
Oh, on the nozzle, no doubt.
All right.
Yeah, nothing better than pushing down a hallway.
Now just make sure you're not like converting to a truckie like secretly behind closed doors. Okay. Fair enough.
If you ask my second favorite position, it's cutting a hole.
Okay. Well, fair enough. Hey, it is a lot of fun. I'm not gonna lie. So, all right. So, who's the most influential person in your career in the fire service person that's influenced you the most, made the most impact in your career?
It's probably got to be Brush.
Yeah,
Brian has been an incredible resource, and has always been willing to just push me harder. So that's been really cool, and he sets the bar really high. So I always just want to be cool like Brush and live up to his expectations, man. Hey. And I say that with so many other people being so influential in my whole process. So it's hard to narrow it down, but for sure, Brush.
Yeah. So okay, that's on the professional side. Now I want to talk about it's a two-part question here. So most influential person in your personal life, you're someone who's kind of helped you in life, that's made the most impact in who you are as a person along the way.
Cool. This one's pretty easy for me, and it's actually three people. So my wife, first and foremost. So my story is pretty cool with her. We've known each other since we were 7 years old. And she's kind of always been a part of my life since then. Didn't start dating until our senior year of high school, but we're going on knowing each other now for almost 30 years. So that's pretty phenomenal. And she has been just such a rock and such a motivator and cheerleader through this whole process. She's followed me to 3 different states, 6 different fire departments. Like, what else can I ask?
She's gotta love you, man.
She loves me unconditionally for sure. Yeah. So that's pretty awesome. And then my parents, they spent 20 years as missionaries in the country of Haiti.
Nice.
Really laid a lot of foundations for me, both with my faith, character in general, work ethic, all of those things I can really accredit to the example that they set in my life.
Yeah, well said, man. Yeah, those people that pour a lot into you, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So, well put. So, all right, what is your personal like favorite fire service book?
Ooh, trying to think. There's quite a few now that have been pretty influential in me. The only one that I think that I've read upwards of like 4 times was probably Step Up and Lead by Frank Viscuso. The first one I ever read was Pride and Ownership. Like my parents got me that like for my very first Christmas after being a volunteer. That one was pretty influential in just kind of setting up my mindset for how I approach this job as a whole. Trying to think beyond that. I mean, there's obviously phenomenal tactics books that you could throw into the mix there, but I feel like those first two that I mentioned were pretty influential in setting up who I want to be as a firefighter.
Yeah, that's both those are fantastic books. Highly recommend it. If people listen, if you haven't read them, like you should really take the time to order them and read them. Really, really good books. All right. So what's upcoming on the horizon, man? What anything exciting coming down the pipe for the Brumleys and both personally, professionally? Any big projects? Any upcoming conferences that you're pumped about, or new classes? Yeah, I know you mentioned the new
Yeah.
class that you're developing. So
Yeah. So that class, Engine Company's Guide to Large Hand Lines. I better be able to know how to say it right. That one I will be teaching at FDIC this year.
nice.
So I'm pretty stoked about that coming up here in a couple of weeks. I also get the opportunity to teach with both Kyle Romagus and Jay Bonifield in Wyoming in May, where we're doing a class just completely dedicated to flowing and moving hand lines. So pretty stoked about that one as well. As far as me, like I'm always pretty goal oriented. I'm not a big person to write down goals, but I always have stuff in the back of my head that I'm working towards. And for the last like 3 months already, I have been nonstop in trying to get promoted. In the thick of reading department policies, SOGs, union contract, all of that, hoping to get promoted to company officer. Yeah, that's getting all of my time right now.
Yeah, it's a lot. No, hopefully some good stuff coming down the pipe for you, though. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little jealous about you guys, and you and Romagus and Bonifield. That's gonna be a good one, man. I really wish I could be out there because that's a heck of a lineup. You guys teaming up together like that. So you you and Bonifield did a little work together, him and Patty, and at the expo a couple years ago. So at not the first time you guys have moved some water together, but
No, I absolutely love that. No, that one was kind of fun because I helped him and then he came help me the next day. And
heck yeah.
whether or not students recognize they got the same class, they might have.
Hey, you know what? It's I don't know, man. People showed up and had a good time, so that's all that matters, right?
I
So
loved it.
blowing a bunch of water and nerd out a little bit on some engine stuff. So absolutely, man. So FDIC, what day is your class at FDIC?
So I'm teaching Friday morning
Okay.
at FDIC. I'd have to look and see which classroom. I don't know that one off the top of my head, but
Sure.
yeah, super excited about that program. And like I said, I kind of see this as an update to the class that I've been teaching for the last 6 years, and really kind of diving into the weeds of all of the decision-making process that goes into kind of what we talked about today, because it's no longer just 1 3/4, 2.5. No, we have like 12 different hand line sizes between those two different diameters now, and trying to figure out which one to purchase and which one to pair with a particular tip. Like that's a pretty overwhelming task. And it's not as simple as, hey, what are the guys down in the street doing? We'll just copy them, because there's huge implications to that as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it. So Friday morning, I have to come. Anybody going to FDIC, come check out Jonathan's class. I know. Hopefully, I will see you there, man. But
Yes, sir.
dude, thank you for sharing some knowledge and passion with us over the last few hours. Really enjoyed it, man. I'll definitely definitely looking forward to getting this one pumped out to the masses, and hopefully we'll see each other in a few weeks in Indy.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
All right, brother. Take care, man.
You too.
See you.